call the meeting to order at 6:35. Thank you all for being here. I don't know if everybody knows Christy. I know most everyone. Christy is our
representing Lincoln this month.
Our Lincoln substitute or non-voting attendee this month. So that's been our expectation with Ari, as he's been here. He's participated in all the discussions, but because you're not an official elected, whatever nominated member of the committee, you wouldn't be able to vote when we take votes. Okay. But we're super excited you're here. And glad to have your voice from Lincoln, and we'll bring back, well, you guys probably won't be meeting this month anyway, but you know, when you're bored and talking to your school board member friends, tell them about what we're doing.
I'll steer you away from any votes until he gets back.
Until Rebecca gets back, right?
Somebody who can vote. Thank you.
Yes, well, thanks for being here. And do you know everybody here? Do you know Kate is a community member from Bristol? You probably know Michaela, Allison.
Yep, I'm good.
You know everyone else? You know Steve?
Yep. I don't know.
Andy Letourneau from Moncton.
Andy Letourneau.
Just a person.
Just a person.
Just a person.
Looked like it was cool. I was walking by.
Needed to
He's
cool
kind of
us.
like you. He's kind of like a non-voting committee because he comes to all of our meetings. So. Okay, excellent. So, just briefly, we have an agenda, obviously, for this evening. We have some exciting stuff on the agenda. Really want to be totally clear that the main goal that we have for our meeting tonight is to get okay with what we've got in our report draft. So what that means is that after this meeting, that report is going to get finalized as a draft and will be circulated widely ahead of our upcoming community forum. So we as a committee need to feel good about what's in there. We did have at our last meeting the opportunity to have some great discussion about that, and I know work has been done since then to try and take into consideration a lot of the comments and suggestions. So we will look forward to that as our main thing we need to accomplish tonight. We will also be doing a little bit of work on the articles. We do have an agenda topic related to the articles, so there were a couple things that were circulated. I just want to mention, in case you guys are flipping through it, we did find out yesterday, Allison uncovered that we had some incorrect census data. So our town population, it was actually the Bristol town population that we had been working with, was not the correct number. It's actually lower by quite a bit. So we still have a 15-member board, but the allocation of those seats has changed from what you've seen in the past. So that is in the handouts of both the latest articles from Steve and the letter about the board representation. So if anyone is looking at it thinking that they're crazy, you're not crazy. That really did just change. So, okay. That is what I want to say about the agenda. So is there any public comment? Public comment?
If
No?
you'll extend me the courtesy to speak later, then I have none.
That's totally fine, thanks. Okay. There's no public comment? You all right trying to do that?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. Great, so the next item on our agenda is to approve our minutes from 6/29. They were enclosed in the packet. And I did actually get one correction by email from Dawn, which was that she was not listed as a board member who was absent, so she wanted us to update the minutes that she was absent. And I also noticed that Caleb should also be listed as not attending the last meeting. And so at this point, if anyone has any other changes?
So is Herb also going to be able to attend by phone? Are we doing
tonight?
That? Tonight?
Herb was not able to attend
Okay,
tonight,
thank
so
you.
he will
Sorry.
not be joining us by phone tonight.
I assure you he's doing something really very brave.
Okay. It's something I would like to be doing, no doubt.
Me too.
Okay, we'll just leave that at that, whatever that little private joke was that just happened over there. But no, so
I
no,
think
Herb
he's
had
on
let me know
vacation.
that he was not going to be able to join us
I think he's on
by
a
phone.
boat.
Okay,
Yes.
okay. Okay, so the minutes from last week, I'd entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
I would make a motion to approve those minutes as amended.
Second by Ed. Any discussion? Okay, so all those in favor of approving the minutes, please raise your hands. Okay, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in favor. Any opposed? Any abstentions? So that would be 6 to 0 to 2, so that motion passes. We do have a 2/3 decision rule on this committee, Christy, which is why we always vote by raising our hands so that we
Thank you.
can count and make sure we have 2/3. Okay, great. So moving on. The next item on the agenda is to review the report. So I do want to thank everyone who was able to get through the report. I recognize that it was sent yesterday with 24 hours notice. Hopefully that was better than only a few hours notice. I know it is a lengthy document, but I also recognize that there was a lot of work done between our last meeting and this one, including a holiday weekend, to try to get that report updated and ready. So we have about an hour and a half planned on the agenda for discussing the report. I honestly have no sense of how much discussion this committee is going to want to have about the report. We did discuss it in our groups last time, and so it's quite possible that we may not need to have a lot of discussion on the report. Hey Caleb, welcome. We can make room for you wherever you would.
Everybody push it down.
Here behind the.
So,
This is extra.
So by way of, to make kind of a structure for how we discuss the report, I don't want to be too prescriptive in that, but first of all, I just really want to recommend to the committee that our goal in discussing the report tonight is to really to focus on the types of information that's in there, things that are not clear or may need some more expansion. I really would like to encourage us not to get really into the weeds of how specific sentences are worded or paragraphs are worded, because I think that we could really spend quite a long time if we got to that level of detail. So I would encourage us to think about sort of the big picture of the report. So what I was thinking we could do is we could tackle it in pieces. So we can just start at the beginning and go through. The first chunk of the report that we, I think, had looked at once as a committee but hadn't really officially discussed a whole lot was the Agency of Ed worksheets. So those are the pages that want to orient themselves sideways instead of lengthwise. So I had worked on updating this section, and basically the table is provided very specifically by AOE. We fill in the right-hand column to go with the information in the left-hand column. Most of the information that I included in here, I pulled either out of the narrative or out of the articles. So this really shouldn't have anything that's new and surprising to anyone. But this is part of what we're required to provide to AOE, and they are interested in having us submit this when we submit the report draft. So with that being said, are there any comments, questions, or concerns about the first section of the worksheets of the report? Andy?
Jen, on page 2, and I think it's mentioned in more than this, but the proposed name of the new district and the idea of having a temporary, but in going through some of the articles, the rules and stuff, it says that the Secretary of State has 45 days to declare, once the vote's taken place, to declare it a corporation or whatever that can be sued and be sued and so on. So my thought was just that again, that technically it may make sense to come close to the name you want or something, because there's probably going to be some legal stamp put fairly quickly that you won't have time to have maybe a nice process under which everyone gets to decide or something. But anyway, and I don't know how big a deal it is to change at a later date, but I just throw out that maybe there's a legal reason to have a name that at least you'd be satisfied with going into this. So.
Great, thanks for the input. We do have an agenda item this evening to talk about that name, and I'm very hopeful that we'll be able to find something that we can call ourselves temporarily until such time as the new board might decide to do further community engagement and work around that. So there would be many places that we could update that through the documents if we could make that decision this evening. Any other comments or questions on the worksheets?
Just to
Mike?
recognize that the 7222 to whatever is mentioned in this section as well as other sections. I'm sure
Well, that'll change.
I'm sure people are aware that page 8, I just noticed it.
And page number, of course, the term's expired.
Yes. Yeah, and honestly, I was hesitant to put the articles in here, except I wanted it to look like a fairly complete draft. I expect that we'll need to review all of this very closely with the final version of the articles. I looked at several examples, and it seems that there's a mix of how people have done this, whether they've put the whole entire article in the table or not. And hey Sarah, I chose to try to put some abbreviated version of the article, thinking that that was probably more helpful, and then reference what article number they could look at for the whole text. I mean, I don't see that you really want this table to be as long as your articles, just in a different structure. So that was the approach I took. I imagine if the AOE has feedback, we'll hear that when they look at our draft. Guys? Any other comments or questions on the worksheets section of the report? Great. So would you grab one of those and we'll pass all this on to Sarah? Caleb, you probably didn't get copies when you came in either.
I didn't get a hard copy, no.
Do you want a hard copy of the report? It's the same as what was emailed.
No, I don't need one, thanks.
Okay. And then there are 2 things that weren't emailed earlier, so those you'll want hard copies coming around.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So hearing no concerns about the worksheet section of the report, we will move on. So the next section of the report is the narrative piece. And so we'll look at the narrative up to the Articles of Agreement. So as I mentioned in the email, the Articles of Agreement that are in the report are not, now we have a more current version, they're constantly changing. So I would prefer that we don't have discussion of the articles that are specifically in the report. We'll discuss those when we talk about the articles. But if you could next turn to the section of pages that starts with the pretty cover page and goes through to where the articles start, which I believe is page 7. So this is the part that I think we did quite a bit of work on at our last meeting. And I'd like to open that up again to comments, questions. Actually, maybe what I'd like to do before that is, I don't know if Allison or Katrina, if either of you would like to say anything about the work you did to take the feedback from the last meeting in making the new draft.
I worked on this section quite a bit, and the feedback from our meeting and then written feedback that we received was really helpful. I would say in particular, Ari's suggestion that we put together somewhat of this executive summary right from the very beginning with the headings that we get into more detail about later was really helpful. I think makes it a little bit more readable for the average community member who hasn't spent as much time in this. That was some of the biggest. It went from that sort of big change to lots of little pieces that I tried to incorporate something from everyone, especially if the same suggestion popped up more than a couple of times. So hopefully you see some of your changes reflected in here that you suggested. Not everything, you know, if something only came up once from one person, we may not have made a change, but certainly the trend feedback is reflected.
Great, and thank you, both of you, for your work on that. Comments, questions, concerns about this narrative section of the report? Steve?
So, one of the things that I don't find in here, and it may well be here and I've missed it, but is certainly one of the things that I talk about when I talk about Act 46 to people, is the concept of spreading the risk of fluctuating school populations out over a larger number of students. So we're all familiar with this when we talk about the special ed part, right? When special ed was part of each elementary school budget, plus or minus one special ed kid would make or break a budget. And the same exists, or I would claim the same exists, when we consider school populations. You know, if in the town of Moncton I lose 2 or 3 families, 7 or 8 kids suddenly disappear from my school, then all of a sudden my school population drops, my property tax goes up. By combining, one of the advantages of combining is you're taking out, you're leveling off that peaks and valleys that you get. I refer to that as spreading the risk of fluctuating school population. I don't know how you might want to talk about that.
And that's because there's one budget.
And it's because all the students, because you're considering, instead of 5 separate populations, or really 6 separate populations of students, well, 5 populations of elementary school students, you're really one population of elementary school students.
And I would draw your attention on
There you
page
go.
5.
Thank you.
There is a sentence that references that. It's near the middle of the page. So if you're on page 5, it says simplifying school budgeting, blah, 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 that paragraph. It's the last sentence of that paragraph. Unification would also allow enrollment changes to be absorbed more
I
easily.
knew that it was there. I had
Due to
seen it,
scale?
and I was trying to, I guess I had seen that when I had previously marked it up. I said, this needs to be pushed further up the ladder. But I'm fine with it there, too.
Just to verify,
Sorry, Michaela's been.
It's fine, you can finish. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was thinking that the way things will be calculated in the future would be that the whole enrollment of the whole 5 towns is the denominator whenever it's figured out. It's not individual towns anymore. And that's why, nothing's changing in the schools themselves. We're not moving kids around. I mean, it's not what we're trying to suggest, it's just how things are calculated.
Great, thanks, Ed. Michaela?
So in the middle of page 4, it starts with the cost of education on a per pupil basis has been on the rise in Vermont for over 15 years. And it goes into it a little bit there and talks about how this could help manage, to manage costs in this reality. It talks about managing resources, but it sort of addresses the decline in population a little bit there as well.
Other comments or discussion? Patrick?
On the page before page 1, I guess that's page 0. Would be the one right after the cover page. I'm wondering if an update on the advisory participants makes sense.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I was working from 3 different documents and didn't realize until this one went out that I was missing at least 4 more names.
And I should have said at the meeting, like, welcome, you're like officially sitting at the table
right.
with us. This was really cool.
Day 4.
Awesome.
Here it is.
All right.
Who's counting?
Okay, excellent. Andy?
Yeah, I think, it's noted in here, I think there's a bunch of work to be done to cite the sources, going back to the appendix and creating that whole linking. The ends policy and the 5-town promise, how are they look like they're hot linked in my paper somehow, but they're not referenced like they're gonna wind up referenced like in the appendix or something. Like I said, it kind of looks like you would click on it and it would pop up or something, but for a handout, that doesn't lend itself.
Allison, would you like to answer that?
I put it at the end of the document, and they're actually appendices unto themselves. So at the moment, the ends policy is Appendix G.
Page 29.
It's page 29. Yeah, page 29. And then 5-town promise is Appendix H, and Act 47 is Appendix I so far.
So next to them, that'll.
Yes,
That's
there'll
all.
be a parentheses that says.
I knew that work had to be done, it just,
Yep,
there it looked
right.
like it was hot linked or something.
And
so-
it is, for the people who might be looking at it online.
Yeah.
And then it goes to the actual document that's also referenced in the appendix.
Great. Thanks, and I do think that's a good observation, Andy, and so even in the section that I worked on with the worksheets, there's places where I know we're gonna reference an appendix, and we need to get, like, I think we're getting to the point now where we can call them by a certain name and it will be the same name, rather than, often if you number your figures too early, you just renumber them 25 times through the document, so I think we're getting there.
We can do it for 10 points.
So do we expect that we would be able to reference specific data in the draft that we're going to be circulating? So that's
Yes.
something that will happen kind of after this meeting?
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Great. Any other comments or questions about the narrative portion of the report? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to the data section, the appendices, I guess I should call it. And let's take those one at a time. So again, we're skipping over the articles. And so the first appendix starts on, probably the page numbers aren't helping you guys looking at it electronically. On the bottom of the page, it says it's page 16,
Well, it should say that in the electronic version too, because it's PDF
right?
at the bottom of those
At
pages.
the bottom of the pages, right? Sometimes when you PDF though, the PDF numbers themselves don't match.
Page 30 of the whole PDF.
I'm on this page.
Oh, you're on it.
So the first appendix is the committee charge. So that we have the committee charge here. The next page following the committee charge, which is numbered 17 at the bottom of it, shows the different study committee meetings and the meetings of the working groups.
So I'll just mention it, oh, never mind, I'm good. I see that we have 3 that'll be in the future, down at the bottom. July 13th, July 20th, July 27th. Regular committee meeting?
And those are just discussions that we've had up to this point, so they're placeholders at the moment.
Right.
And if we have a meeting, it'll stay the way it is or however it needs to be changed. And if we don't have a meeting on that date, it will get pulled.
Yeah.
I wonder, do you feel like it would be better, since the report will be dated, say, like July 11th, that we call it, say it's a planned
Yeah,
or something like that?
Yeah.
Would that feel-
it's just weird. And plus it says 6:30 to 7:30, and I think that would be wonderful, but.
Well, I
Maybe we
did
should leave it
notice
on then,
that-
Steve.
Wondering
I
about
did
some of
note,
the line
Allison,
report,
that you referenced the one that ended at 11:30, but I think we had a number of them that went later than 9.
Yes,
but
I was gonna
wouldn't
go
blame
through
you.
meeting minutes and get the, or no,
Well,
I was gonna go through meeting minutes and get the times that we adjourned.
That seems
I know.
above and beyond.
I think it's probably not necessary.
Okay.
I do owe you a couple of other, the communications working group did have a couple of earlier meetings, and I realized you asked me for that meeting with Darren too, so I will get those to you.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions about the information on the different meetings and activities? Andy?
Was the event up in Lincoln prior to the committee or not, because it was prior not listed, or remember we had the meeting up there? I'm just, whether or not that's, I mean, the meeting was of value, I went to it. I don't know if it had to be before the committee, after the committee, or whatever, but, you know, there was an open house and it was quite well attended.
Allison?
I was actually going to suggest that we add the meeting that happened in Lincoln because it's around Act 46. And I think in your packet, these are called, and I don't even know what they're called, but they're now called ANESU community events. And so the Lincoln meeting, and then the one you mentioned in Moncton, and so to find the date for that and to put that in here as well.
So the title at the top would be ANESU
Act 46
community
community,
events.
community events. And then July 18th would be planned.
Great. So are you asking the representatives from the Lincoln and the Moncton board to get you the date that those
Yes,
events
please.
happened? So,
Yep.
so Christy, can we give you an action? It's an easy one, I think. but just to find the date when Lincoln had the Act 46 meeting.
Oh,
Yeah,
before all this.
I want to say, because we did one in Moncton and it was around the same time.
Right.
I want to say it was in June of last year. That would be my guess.
Okay.
Because it was after the legislation passed.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like before we stopped having meetings.
Right, okay, I'll
But-
try to find that one out and let you know.
Thanks. And there was one in Southborough also?
That's
the November
9th
In
one.
there already? Okay, and then was there ever one combined between Beaman and Bristol? Nope,
No.
that didn't happen, okay.
Okay, so if there's no further discussion, we will move to the next appendix. Or the next, I don't know if you are ending up with them all labeled as individual appendices. But the next one is the student enrollment information, school assets and debts and financial information. Let's do those one at a time. So the student enrollment information. You pass me one of those hard copies, they're in color.
And he had it in
Mine's
pre-K.
not in color. So Allison, do you want to say anything about the student, oh, they're not in color. Never mind. Someone had one in color.
No. Oh, I have one. This is,
That's
this
okay.
is,
No, I don't really need it. It's fine. So the student enrollment information, I think that, I know in my small group last time, we had some discussion about the enrollment. And so Allison, I think that you updated this to be clear that it includes pre-K
Mm-hmm.
students, yeah?
And I think actually on the first one, the enrollment trends, 16, 17 doesn't use a decline, or those numbers are budgeted, the budgeted numbers.
So you're gonna update then
Yes,
what it says in
yep.
the header?
Yep, and I actually have that
Okay,
updated.
great.
And I made that, I made the note of when the Agency of Education started or stopped including pre-K. They had a separate line for supervisory union where pre-K numbers were captured. No other grades were captured, but just that. And then the year 12, 13, the agency stopped putting them in the SU line and put them in the schools themselves that the students applied to. So I don't know what the pre-K numbers would be for each of the individual schools. 12, 13 going forward, they're just all rolled together in the school, however the Agency of Education did it.
Okay, and I don't know that it's important to have those numbers separate, right?
Right, yeah, because we're not doing anything with them.
Nancy?
So were we funding pre-K publicly beginning in 12, 13 with local dollars?
With local dollar, maybe we have local funding for our early education program here in Addison Northeast,
And so,
plus EEI funding, and I don't remember how far VCPC funding went back. I'd really have to dig.
so when you look at, for example, Lincoln in 12, 13, 141 students, are those kids, are the pre-K kids in that number locally funded, or should they show up in the ANESU only? Do you know what I'm saying? Because there's been a big change more recently than 12, 13, but these enrollment numbers don't reflect that really, it seems.
Great. Steve?
So Nancy, it's not that it's not a good point, but I thought that this graph was just trying to give me an idea of what my population trends were.
I think it's enrollment trends.
Is that-
enrolled,
Right, it's the enrollment, it's
in-
just enrollment, that's all, that's the
Right,
only thing this
so,
graph represents.
I
It
mean-
doesn't represent any budget numbers.
No, I understand that.
So then the budget numbers related to those enrollment numbers would then be on page, say, 26 approximately, where the combined enrollment and total expenditures trend is listed. And that captures all of the money spent by the district altogether. So that would include any funds received for pre-K.
So I know that when we were talking with Howard, we had a conversation with Howard last week and asked him about what, there's all different ways you can measure how many students you have. And his suggestion was to go with enrollment because it was the most straightforward measure, because it more directly relates to the kids that you have in the building. The pre-K ones are a little bit harder for me to conceptualize because they're not in the building, but we were we were all contributing into that early ed
Through the
separate
ANESU
budget,
assessment,
through an assessment. But I think that we did have a change 2 years ago where we included 3-year-olds and we expanded, made more of a push to get more students. And so I just wonder, because I know in Moncton, that drove for us a bump in our equalized pupils where we didn't have more kids in our K through 6 population, but we had more kids in our pre-K. So when you look at it, the line doesn't go down, but it's because we've adding kids that we never counted before, right? So I think I think somewhere we've got to acknowledge that, because we're saying our enrollment's going down, but in some cases it doesn't really
The
look
graph
that way.
certainly doesn't make it look that way, does it?
Yeah, that's right. Although the ANESU district graph looks like it's going down, that's for sure.
Great. Was there another hand? Susan, did you have your hand up? No.
So maybe you just said it, and I think what I was getting from Nancy's question is, has the change in policy over this time span resulted in a change in the numbers?
And if it has, why wouldn't we see that?
And if it has, it should be a note somewhere. Maybe that's what you said. There should be just an explanation of that.
It sounds like the question is, in these first couple of years in this chart, did we count all pre-K or some pre-K kids?
Yeah.
When at some point, maybe it looks like 3 years back, we started counting all pre-K kids. So are we really, I think the intent here was to compare apples to apples for all of these to show pre-K through 6 for the elementary schools and then Mount Abe's enrollment.
But Patrick,
The question is, are we really comparing apples to apples?
Yeah.
Susan, do you want, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, do you want to answer that? Or do you
I
want to
can
answer that?
try to answer it. We were trying to count them all. I believe last year we found a couple of schools where they actually didn't hit the books because the schools were only counting children on IEPs receiving early education services. So we caught that and corrected it. But I don't know if these numbers reflect that or not, so.
And maybe we're sort of losing the forest for the trees a little bit here. The point of this graph is to articulate the number of students we have in our schools is going down.
Yeah, but that's not what
But it's not what the graph
articulating.
shows.
Right.
All right, so hold on, sorry, Mike was waiting because I asked you to wait. Mike, and then we'll go down this side.
so does that mean that in 12, 13, we were attempting to count all 3-year-olds in private care? No.
We weren't.
No,
And I mean, today, we're moving those kids for at least 10 hours of payment through the pre-K process, those very same kids. And so the policy change does result in a different set of kids. My only point, I think you said it, I just think there should be an asterisk somewhere saying there's been a change in policy, or I don't know exactly what words, but just noting it.
yep, Michaela?
Yeah, I'm fairly certain that the 12, 13, at least relative to Bristol, that 295 number includes K through 6 students at Bristol Elementary School and not pre-K students. So it does look like the population is going up in Bristol because we're including 3 and 4-year-olds. So that does feel like, it would feel, unless we included some sort of information there, a little bit deceiving, I think.
Great, Nancy?
So it sounds like the numbers here really need to be checked, and we need to make sure that if we're using the word enrollment, we're talking about kids who are enrolled in our schools. And if we're using the words student population, then we're talking about that. And that it isn't population in some parts of the graph and enrollment in others.
Patrick?
Would there be any advantage to looking at K-12 numbers? Because there's some confusion around the pre-K. Then we don't have to hope people understand an asterisk that then articulates where the change was and what the change was made and how it, like.
Well, that would certainly help it make it look like the enrollment was going down.
And I think it paints a clearer picture of what's real.
Do you think so?
I mean, all of those pre-K kids eventually become K, and then 1 and then 2.
Maybe.
Not all though,
Well,
the majority.
the majority.
Right, well, I think that the concern is that we, at some point during this, started counting kids, because we're paying for kids, so they, I mean, it's not that we're artificially counting them. We are now funding kids and counting them as students, when before, families funded them and they didn't count as students. And so the rules of what we're counting may have changed throughout the period that is captured in this graph. So I'm curious if we would have, if the numbers that we have allow us to separate the pre-K students, or if that's rolled into the data that we have.
It's separated elsewhere, I'll just have to find it. I know I've seen it, so I just have to figure out where to find it.
Okay, we had a
I
few
know
other
where it is.
comments here. Yes, and, I'm sorry, yeah, Steve, and then.
No, I was
That's
about
what you
to
wanted to
make
say.
Patrick's point.
I would just do it in asterisks and just note it, I personally.
I can live with either way. I'm just, clarity, I think, is the important thing.
Allison?
Well, and there's also a policy change where we went, pre-K was essentially, I think, 4-year-olds, and pre-September 1st, 5-year-olds. Now it includes 3-year-olds. So I think 12, 13 was probably 4-year-olds, and then, not this year, the year, and then Act 166 happened with universal pre-K, which rolled up the 3rd 3-year-olds. So that would be 13, 14. So we would have, or 14, 15. So 12, 13, 13, 14 would be pre-K 4-year-olds. 14, 15, 15, 16, 16, 17 would be pre-K 3 and 4-year-olds. Is that what we want for the asterisk?
Therein lies my concern with an asterisk. Right.
Yeah.
It might be a couple of that.
Well, and we had caps too, remember, we had an X amount of funding.
Yeah.
And so we have to cap it, unlike now where we don't cap it, so, yeah, it was a moving target for many years.
But there is a way to know what the enrollment was.
Well.
Enrollment in terms of,
Because this office was doing counting and then there was this separate census thing going on in the schools, I'm not sure how reliable the data is between those two sources because it was happening that way. I mean, we'd really have to go back and look.
So one other possibility would be to use ADM instead of enrollment.
Yep.
I imagine. Howard suggested not using ADM because that, and don't quote me on this stuff, although I'm apparently on TV saying it, I believe ADM has to do with literally a 10-day period in October, and you count the kids in your building every day for those 10 days and then average it or something, and that's your ADM. Whereas your enrollment tries to capture more like what, how many students you really have. You would
As
have
of
to get someone
October
more
1st.
knowledgeable than me to explain why that's different, but I think that our ADM numbers don't include pre-K. And we should have firm ADM numbers because we assess everything by
They do now.
ADM.
We're gonna have the same problem,
Right.
ADM or enrollment.
But I
Well, we're
think
counting pre-K and ADM now.
enrollment's gonna, ADM's gonna add another complicating factor if there happened to be some sort of sickness going through that time period, and so then your ADM could be, you know, more off from what your enrollment is, and then I think enrollment's the figure we want. We just need to figure out what we want to do with this pre-K number. Count them, not count them. If we're going to count pre-K, then how do we make it so we're either comparing apples to apples or make it known where the separation is between the change in practice or policy or how we counted them, which I think would be a challenge.
Could the asterisk say
that it's just K to 12, and because of the reasons you're just saying, because it was confusing from that. Then you don't have to do each one, each year.
I guess the only hesitation I have is I know in our Moncton budget meeting this year, we talked about like, yay, our equalized pupils went up because we get to count pre-K now, you know, I mean, that was like, that was how we made our budget
Right.
work this year, so, for folks like Andy who pay attention to those things, you know, that it might then be confusing. I think it is probably more transparent to acknowledge that we are now counting students that we didn't used to count. I wonder if there's some other metric, no, I'm not gonna make up new numbers, no, Ed.
Looking at the numbers, it looks like the 5 elementary schools are flat or have a slightly uptick, which is probably the pre-K. It's Mount Abe that tips it down, and the aggregate reflects Mount Abe, not the elementary schools.
Yeah.
That's right. What's going on at Mount Abe? Is that dropouts?
No,
What is it?
it's New Haven.
It's
A
what?
lot of it is New Haven right there. You have to go 2 years, when you look at New Haven's numbers back when you hit 98, 91.
Oh, because we didn't send.
Well, I don't know if you didn't, I don't know why, I don't know what
Yeah,
it
we
is,
had
but whatever your
graduation
numbers are.
classes of 3 and 5.
Right.
Your
Yeah,
current
eight,
7th and 8th
five, yeah.
graders, well, going up into 8th and 9th graders, those are the wicked small classes right now. And that's why Mount Abe is so
You're
small,
right, you're right,
low,
you're right,
it's
you're right.
going low.
Yeah.
And then now, there's gonna, after
So we're
the
gonna
incoming
see,
7th graders, you're actually gonna see an uptick happen for 17, 18.
And then if things continue.
And it
it's
continues to
actually-
uptick
well,
a little
like
bit.
Kindergarten, first and second, and all of our schools are in the double digits. There are no more 3-digit class sizes right now, looking at all the elementary schools after 3rd grade. So I don't know if that'll change, but there's another downward trend. Fascinating.
Yeah, all kinds of different
So-
ways to look at it.
of course. Of course.
So it seems to me part of what we're wrestling with is that there are different ways to look at the numbers that do indicate that the class sizes are getting smaller. And this might not be showing that picture. And I'm not sure if we want to try to imagine another way to show that picture. I mean, I imagine that we see in Moncton, we see like sort of year by year the class enrollments, and I think one of the reports, I can't remember, maybe it was, I was looking at several different ones, but one of the reports that I was looking at recently from one of our surrounding districts had it actually, I think maybe they had a stacked column chart and then they had the breakout, rather than year by year the breakout flow, they had the breakout by class, so you could see, you know, maybe it was pre-K and
Cohorts,
K6
all
or
the
something, you
cohorts.
know. But, you know, I want to be cautious that we don't imagine lots of new data to try to get together, you know, in the next 24 hours.
Can I just try
Yeah,
it?
Mike,
Asterisks, due to changes in state law, 3 and 4-year-old, the way pre-K population is counted has changed over the last X years. Something, is that not enough? Heads up, there's another factor here. Not to go into all the detail of caps and how it changed year to year.
reactions? So I'll react, I like it, I think that we might just want to make sure that it says that it counts more. Like, so not only has it changed, but it's expanded the countable pre-K population or something like that.
Due to the addition of the pre-K and it's.
So there's some right at the beginning of that figure, right? Talks about ANESU enrollment trends. Student enrollment numbers include pre-K students in each school beginning in FY13. A couple, another sentence there too.
Should that say each elementary school?
Yes.
So what did you say?
It's not in, the pre-K is not in the school.
But it gets counted at the elementary school level. Right, so what I wrote down, of what Mike said with my suggestion, how to change it was, something like, due to changes in state law, the way pre-K population is counted has expanded pre-K population over the report period, or something like that. Caleb?
Maybe I'm not understanding this right. Is the kind of issue generally, is it fair to summarize it as, if you kind of look, say, just like the ANESU district decline in numbers, that rate of decline is less steep than it otherwise would have been because we're feathering in pre-K people over that period, right? That's.
Yep.
Yes.
So maybe we say something like that, just like, I mean, because that's kind of the issue is we're seeing a bigger decline in this if we hadn't changed those numbers, and that rate of decline plays into the decision people are making. And so this is are we afraid that somebody would look at this and say, that's not going down that fast, that's just trickling down. I'm not worried, you know what I mean? I'm just trying to, but that's it, basically.
Nancy?
Well, I mean, I think people who are close to these schools will look at these numbers and question them for a whole lot of different reasons. So, because they don't fit with what people believe they know is true.
Mostly because it's not going down fast enough?
Well,
what are the other-
initially, they won't read the part at the top that says it's about pre-K to 12. They'll think K to 12, and the numbers in the elementary schools will look really big. And then when they know it's pre-K, they're going to look at the 12, 13 and say, wait a minute, we didn't have that many pre-K kids in Lincoln. So it'll be confusing to people, and it'll get, if the next graph is using those numbers, in the next graph, if I'm reading it correctly, it looks like our class sizes are increasing.
Yeah, but let's not go to the next graph yet.
Okay.
So I wonder if it might be possible to keep this chart with some sort of note. I like the way you expressed it, Caleb. I think that does get more to what we're trying to address. And that perhaps what follows it on this page is some sort of a table that perhaps exists already within the central office, if I was really hopeful. We've had one presented for Moncton of just, the class, so by grade, what the enrollment was over a few years or something like that, so that it gives a little bit more detail so that you can see pre-K. And you always see this stuff, it moves like in a diagonal, right? Because from year to year, the pre-K becomes K, becomes 1. And maybe that would be an additional support that would help people understand what's in this chart. Does something like that exist now within the central office?
By grade, by school.
Yeah,
I
feels like
don't
you're.
think so, but
No.
it shouldn't be too hard. I'm looking at the AOE site right
The
now,
AOE
just
does.
to tease out.
Yeah,
They
it does.
do very clearly
Yeah.
tell you how many of the kids in these numbers, all the way back to 12, 13, were
Yeah.
counted as pre-K. So I'm starting there, and that's already pretty fascinating, considering Lincoln went from 2 kids counted in 13, 14 to 30 counted in 14, 15. I mean, it tells quite an interesting story. But just the opposite is happening in Starksboro, where it was 18 in 1 year, and 2 years later it was 1. So it's kind of, I mean, how
Well,
deep
then
shall
it goes
we go?
to Susan's comment
Right.
about, it depends on how the
How
school
you're
was
counting.
counting
In her
the
brand new
data.
program.
Right,
Okay,
it
great.
may be
Yeah.
causing more confusion than it's worth.
Steve?
I'm back to really wanting to just see K through 12 on this chart. It would simplify, it would make our point easier, and I'm happy to do the work, Allison.
No, it's not a question of doing the work, but then if you say just K to 12 in here,
Yeah.
then I
Then
don't
some of
know
the
if
further
there's
back.
any way of determining on the total enrollment versus total expenditures, determining where in their pre-K expenses fit.
So, does.
So that chart is pre-K
I understand.
enrollment
is
and
it-
expenditures.
And does it hurt for them? it's a question, it's not a statement. I mean, we're trying to show something on this, and what we're trying to show is our enrollment figures and that they're going down, and if we can keep apples to apples rather than, because now we're comparing
Okay.
apples, nectarines, and oranges.
And actually on that combined enrollment and combined expenditures, it's an aggregate of all of the student apples against an aggregate of all of the student expenditures.
Yeah.
So, I think that would work. I can do the K through 12.
Caleb?
Maybe we could point out that, I don't know, maybe this is just confusing. I'm just thinking that on this chart, Mount Abe doesn't have any pre-K in there, and so to a certain extent you could point to it and say, well, there's an example without the pre-K in there. You kind of got it side by side there. I know there's some unique factors in Mount Abe that maybe it's going down a little more precipitously than we're anticipating over, a longer time frame, but it is an example of some data in there that's unaffected by this, and you could put a little arrow pointing to it along with the next point. I don't know, I'm just thinking, it's not that huge. It's a difference. It's not just, I think, there's a lot of data in here already, and actually maybe my notes and appendices would just make it worse, but it just seems like it's fairly dense. I see what Nancy's saying, that it's hard to crunch in there, but it really is kind of, I don't think you want to make it too much denser than it already is, and I don't know if pulling out the pre-K would be more, it doesn't sound like it would be more accurate, but maybe it would be, yeah, I don't know, a little more, but I just want to point out that Mount Abe kind of seems a little unaffected by that, which, and the graph looks a little different.
Great. Patrick?
So kind of tying together what Caleb was saying about adding some language and clarity, and thinking about the note, we may still want to keep a note or not, and thinking about what Steve said about the point we're trying to make. Right now we have some language above the graph that sort of explains what the graph is, but doesn't go so far as to make explicit the point we're trying to show with this graph. I wonder if we added a sentence that says, you'll see in this graph that something's happening here, and it sort of highlights the point we're trying to make, rather than hoping that someone's going to understand the graph and see the point we're trying to make with it. And then perhaps if we did have a note, we haven't confused our point that much more where they might miss it completely. It might actually help to articulate the point we're trying to make even further. Just to be explicit, this is what we're trying to show you with this graph.
Great. So I would love to remind the committee that we have a lot of graphs and other appendices to talk about, but I want to make sure that I guess I'm looking at Allison, that you feel like you have clear enough direction on what to do to get to what we put in the report that gets circulated for this graph.
Yeah.
Patrick?
I just want to add that my thinking on that, looking at some of the other graphs, I would apply that for every graph and table that we have.
Yep.
We're trying to make a point, let's just
Yep.
make the point really explicit.
Should we, as a committee, efficiently state what our point is for the graphs? Or do we want to leave that? I mean, I'm hesitant because I could see us spending some discussion on that, but at the same time, I'm not sure if we as a committee want to delegate that or whether we want to discuss it. So I guess that's a question. Strong feelings in either direction? Allison, do you have strong feelings about, do you want that to be clear from the committee, or do you feel comfortable?
I think I can get that. I think I can put that together. If people want to send me suggestions on how to word that, that would be great, but I don't think we need to take the time in this meeting to do that. If people have specific suggestions about specific graphs or tables or whatever that they would like, that they think we're trying to present as information in that, you can send that to me and I can incorporate that in, because I do want to make the explanations about these pieces of information broader and more comprehensive. Yeah. So that's, offline would be fine.
So could I amend your statement?
Sure.
To say by noon tomorrow? Is that reasonable, knowing that we're trying to have this draft out
Right,
on Monday,
yeah.
published on Monday? So if you want to provide input in writing, or either late night tonight or tomorrow morning, please. Excellent, okay, there was a hand. Mike?
I just want to say out loud that I think it's a very good public policy change to have included pre-K and to publicly fund pre-K. And I understand the complexity of having the change of policy in the middle of this, and I'm troubled by just pulling it out for bigger public policy reasons.
Nancy?
I agree. I think that an asterisk, the one that Mike suggested, just making note of a change in law and policy and noting when that took place, we'll probably do it without throwing out the pre-K kids out of the graph completely. Especially since when we get to the budget numbers, our budget numbers reflect expenditures for those kids, so.
Great, so we're gonna move on to the second graph on this page. So the second graph on this page talks about student to teacher ratios. And so we had a data table in here before that showed some of that those numbers were broken out. And this is a view across the schools. And if I had to take a stab at what the point of this graph would be to show what the trend is in our student to teacher ratios in the different schools in the district compared to the statewide average.
And the spike is good news.
That shows that we've already done work to reduce our staff level.
Save money.
Nancy?
I'm just needing clarification about, I see a teacher is defined as pre-K, kindergarten, elementary, secondary, and ungraded. So is it classroom teachers? Is it all professional staff?
No, it's classroom teachers. I was trying to think of how, do you call yourself faculty?
That's professional staff, not
Well,
classroom teachers.
Right, I think the AOE usually counts professional staff, right? So they would count
Professional
like your
staff and-
literacy specialist would be.
But that's separate. A teacher's separate from professional staff.
No, a teacher is part of the professional staff, but.
AOE defines them in different categories
Yes.
and we talk
Right.
about them, or that even that our own contract defines them
Yes,
as.
yep.
So there's more categories.
AOE definition of teacher is a person who teaches in a classroom pre-K, K, elementary, secondary, and ungraded, which I saw the definition for that today.
So
from AOE.
Just so you understand my question, does this count, for example, our teachers, library media specialists?
No.
Those people are all part of the professional staff? And so, again, it's the apples to apples question. Is the AOE defining it in the same way we are in this graph? That's just my question.
Allison?
So I think, Nancy, what you're asking is, I think you're thinking about adults to students,
No.
not just teachers to students.
I'm thinking that what we want to show is student to teacher ratio, student to classroom teacher ratios, classroom teacher defined as academic subjects at 7 through 12 and classroom teachers pre-K to 6. I think that's what we want to show. But I don't know what the agency is showing there. And
Exactly what you said.
That is what.
That is exactly what you were, that's exactly what it is.
That's what the AOE is, and that's what's here?
Yes, that's
Okay.
what it says right above there. A
Okay.
teacher is defined as pre-K, K.
So I think if that beginning part could be clearer, that that's what it is. At least it wasn't clear to me, the way it's written.
And I think that the point is that also that these are numbers that are from AOE that are measuring a consistent definition of teachers across those different categories, whatever, the schools in the state. Patrick?
I wonder if just the addition of the term classroom teacher there adds a lot of clarity. I mean, I think when folks are thinking about classroom teachers, they're not thinking about specialists. I think they're thinking about my third grade teachers, my fourth grade teachers, not my art teachers, my PE teachers. And we could make our point in the language,
Right.
which will help.
I also am wondering, so if you look at 1213 Bristol, the ratio is 9.87. That's just classroom teachers? No, it isn't.
Seems small.
That's not just classroom teachers.
Well, that's
It
the
can't be.
ratio of classroom teachers to students.
Of students to
So,
classroom
yes,
teachers.
Students to teachers.
Got it.
So, yes,
Classroom teachers.
to,
No, it's student to
it's
teacher.
student to teachers, so each,
That's saying on
So
average.
each teacher has
each
9
teacher
point,
had 9.8 students.
so that doesn't seem right.
That is not right.
On average.
But if it's an average, then there has to be less than 9.87 and more. And there
That's
are
not
not
right.
less than 9.87. So I would offer that the ungraded is professional staff specialists.
Right.
Like your literacy specialist, math specialist, art, music, whatever.
Actually, it's not.
Okay, so, time out.
No, it's-
Time out. So, the numbers that are in this chart, did they come from AOE?
Yes.
Katrina, is that the same page of AOE that you were on?
No, but I was gonna get there.
Could we table the discussion of what the definition of a teacher is for the moment and get a clear answer? Because these numbers, I know we've had this conversation, right? I remember on the boards, we had it presented in 15 different measures, depending on if you counted the kitchen, the cafeteria staff as part of this, it's, the numbers come from AOE, right? And we just need to make sure we have a clear definition of what they are.
I feel like I might be able to mitigate it. If it's pre-K, then 9.87 might make sense, because their numbers are smaller. That would do it. Yeah.
Why that much? Okay, Nancy?
One adult per 5 kids.
We just want to say that the numbers coming from the AOE doesn't reassure me.
Okay, what I'm trying to say is that we can't solve world hunger here. We can't define what the state's gonna measure as a teacher. We can take the ratios that the state is publishing for different schools. If we're gonna compare it to what the state is saying its average ratio is, we can't come up with a different definition of how we're gonna define that ratio. If we decide we want a teacher to be, I don't know, everyone in the building, but then we compare that to the state that has a different definition of that, then we're not comparing things that are similar. So we need to just find out what that definition is, and then we can state it clearly here,
Well-
so that we know what the definition is for these numbers, right? Yes? Nancy?
Well, it might be possible, if what we really want to convey to community members is average class size, and I think that is what we want to convey, it might be possible to get that definition of that number from a statewide number from the AOE, which may not be this number. So this statewide number, do you know what I'm saying? So this is what the AOE put out. If it isn't the data that we need, I wonder if it's possible to get the data, the statewide data that we want, and compare it to the local data that we want to portray. Because that is what we want to communicate to the community, I think. We certainly don't want people thinking we have typical class sizes of 9, because it's not the case.
Well, and that's the first year, right? But, yes, okay, Patrick?
That was only going to be, my only suggestion was, let's identify what's the point we're trying to make here, and then we can decide what are we looking at? Because I had the same thought at one point, are we really talking class size? Is that what we're trying to articulate here? Or are we talking about how many professionals are serving, on average, how many students are served by a professional in the building? Those are two different messages, pretty dramatically different messages. I think we need to identify which one are we trying to do. Maybe we want to present both, but we'd have to do it in a different way. So even before Katrina really looks at how does the state define teacher, let's figure out what are we trying to say with this graph.
Caleb?
Does anybody, Allison, do you know what the definition of a secondary or ungraded teacher is? Like,
Secondary is 7 through 12, and then ungraded is adult learners, vocational, and there are a couple of other categories that fall in there. I don't think that we would have very many of those in our district. Ungraded specifically, I can't.
Okay, but that wouldn't include somebody who is like a music teacher who has a classroom but different kids come in from different grades.
No. Got some.
I still think we need to just get the official definition from AOE of what is, and I hear you that you read it, and I think it will be helpful to people, but to continue to debate that is not gonna help us right now. So perhaps we can turn our attention to the question that Patrick raised of what are we trying to communicate with this graph? Andy?
One of these specific goals AOE lays out is the goal of increasing the district level ratio of students to full-time equivalent staff. That's one of their specific goals, which I guess I was thinking that's what this was trying to get to. I don't know.
Are you gonna answer him, because Allison was waiting?
Go for it, Alice.
I was actually gonna say that. So the goal is full-time equivalent staff. This graph is teachers only, which is not what is in that stated goal.
Correct.
So if what we want is that stated goal, then we have to determine what full-time equivalent staff is. And I would suggest that we leave that up to Patrick and Katrina and Susan and the other administrators in the central office to determine, and then we can pull the data from the AOE based on what they, because I'm thinking full-time staff is, I don't know if we want kitchen staff in there, but you know, it's essentially almost every single person in the building. But do we exclude custodial and kitchen, or are we talking academic? Unfortunately, that goal is too vague.
And we can't solve world hunger here.
Right.
We can only solve the problems we can solve here. Patrick?
But that brings me back to my question, is what we're trying to provide information on is how many little faces are sitting out in that classroom for that teacher who is instructing them? How many adults in the building, all adults in the building, does it take per child? Or how many children per each one of those adults? Really broad category. Or how many professionals specifically are served by these children? There are three different pieces of information that say similar things, but what is it really we're trying to advertise?
Ed?
Yeah, one of those questions has to deal with learning, class size, and the other has to deal with overhead. How much overhead does the building have to run? And that's an expense question more than anything else. So this one I think is about the learning question, how bigger it gets towards class size, but not exactly. But this is the metric that the AOE has chosen when we find out what it really means.
So I actually would like to try to comment on that, because I expect that I will reference this figure specifically in the worksheets. If you remember ages ago when we talked about those at the beginning, there is a part that talks about how we're addressing each of the goals, and one of those goals is to increase the student to staff ratio. And I actually included a statement that I found in one of the other examples because I thought it was really good, that says something along the lines of, we already have addressed staffing levels, and our staffing level, our student to staff ratio is above the state average, so we don't expect to make changes to that based on unifying. Because I think that's where we are. We have already changed. You can see a trend where that has changed pretty significantly in the last few years. So I don't think that, so to me, part of what we're trying to show here is we've already done some work to try to, in corporate world we call it right size our staff, right, to address some of the trends that we're hearing about. You hear people talking at Act 46 and you hear these passionate stories about these schools with only 2 students in a classroom, or 1 teacher, teaching 1 student, like where their ratios are really, really difficult because of their populations. And to me, what we're trying to say with this is, one, like, we're not in that place of having classes with 2 students to a teacher, and we've already done work. And we're already trending in the right direction, and we're actually quite a bit above what the state average is. So to me, I don't know if it really matters what definition of teachers we use. I mean, the numbers might look a little different, and maybe the trends look a little different depending on your definition, but to me, that's the story. Allison?
So I noticed that when you put that in the worksheets. And so my concern was, I'm talking about teachers specifically with that specific definition, and you're saying staffing, which is paraeducators, librarians, media specialists, educational assistants, special ed people, speech language pathologists. I mean, staffing is, I don't know if I would include custodial and kitchen service in that, or food service in that, but it's instructional, however it happens, contact with the student is what I think of when I think of staffing. And that, to me, essentially includes everyone except, even though custodians and food service have an instructional component just by interacting with a child, but some sort of academic.
But not
piece.
special education.
Well, but
Right.
special ed is included in, to me, is included in staffing. Not every child.
Right, but it's not included here. I was.
No, exactly, right. This is just teachers, classroom academic teachers is essentially what this is.
Patrick?
If in fact the point we're trying to make is that we've done some work and we're in pretty good shape in our staff to student ratio, as you've said, which is in alignment with the worksheet that you referenced, which is also in alignment with the AOE goal that Andy referenced. So I guess my indication here is that might not be a bad point to make because it connects to those things that were there. Then that changes teacher to staff.
But-
Maybe that's what we're trying to say.
But the problem is when you bring in those other adults into the ratio, our number goes south.
Right.
And we are not,
So maybe what it indicates is we have some more work to do.
we do. But it depends on what the classroom academic teacher, we are fantastic with. Our ratios on that are fabulous. It's the educational assistants, SLP, special ed, and other things that we have an issue with. And so I don't have a problem conveying that, but the two pieces need to match. Staffing levels, if we're gonna say staffing, then we need to define what the staffing is. If we're gonna say teachers and teachers there, but then get into a little bit more discussion about then the next tier of academic instruction to a student would be this group of adults, and this is where we have work, because we had massive cuts to our budget last year, and that's why the numbers are so good, for teachers anyway.
So I see we have a few hands up, and I'm gonna come to you. We need to find a way to move through these more efficiently, because we have spent about half an hour on this page, and we have more pages to go through. Maybe this is the one that has everyone's concerns, but I hate to be that hopeful. So I'm not sure how we figure out what we're doing with this, but we need to do that. So Mike, you've been waiting.
I it's about politics, and people count these numbers in different ways to prove different points. I personally the thing that makes the most sense to me is classroom teachers. How many little faces are looking at that teacher who's trying to do the job? That's what I think we should present.
Patrick?
And that was I was going to offer a question that might perhaps be simple for us to answer that will send us in a direction. Are we trying to make a point about fiscal responsibility when we're talking about number of adults versus number of kids? Or are we talking about the educational opportunities we're providing based on the class sizes we have? So it kind of comes back to something Ed said before. Are we talking about, like, fiscally, are we managing things well given the number of students we have? Or educationally, are we maintaining class sizes that we're pretty happy about or not? I feel like it's one or the other, and depending on the answer to that question, drives what kind of information are we looking to provide in this table. So if we could answer that one question, perhaps we'd have a direction.
Michaela was waiting.
Yeah, and I guess I go back to looking at neighboring towns that already have done these reports. Do they have this graph in their report?
So far, no.
But we were just looking at Chittenden South and I didn't see it in there.
Or Addison Central.
Or Addison Central. So I guess I'm wondering do we need this graph? If it's confusing to us and we're having this conversation, how confusing is it gonna be to other people? Is this a necessary component of our report?
Steve?
And on the flip side, I sort of agree with Michaela, but, or I would say you ought to have two graphs there, and one graph is class size, and the other graph is student to staff ratios. Based on, that's what's in our worksheet. And I'll stop there.
Sarah, did you raise your hand?
Well, I think it's hard to actually do this classroom size thing because when everyone's thinking of that, they're thinking of K through 6. And in 7 through 12,
That's a good
it's
point.
art teachers and music teachers and whatever are actual, like a certain kind of faculty. And then you have the pre-K, and I think that if we're gonna do that, we could just do an elementary graph, if that's really that important, or put it all together.
Thank you. Allison?
So I'm trying to find it quickly. There is one district close to us, and I'm almost thinking it's Addison Northwest. I had originally a table that had students or enrollment, teachers, adults, administration, and then the ratios.
Yeah, you did.
And that's what that table was getting at, was a teacher to student ratio and then an adult across the entire school to student ratio. And it's either Addison Central or Addison Northwest, but that's what I was trying to get to with that table, but then I had to figure out all of the adults in a school, and that's beyond my capability. And my brain is really starting to hurt at the moment, so we need to decide what we want to say in this section.
Caleb?
Yep.
I'm just curious, would it be something, not so much about one of the existing things, I know we don't want to add a lot of things, but could we have one that kind of speaks to special education, since it's not included here and it is such a big part of the budget and kind of, it seems like good information that could maybe be included? I wonder if something like that would be possible, that would basically show changing dynamics of kind of the special education department, and are there kind of ratios in there that would be applicable, or is that not the kind of graph that would really work? Just thinking it would be other good information to include and represents a significant part of our schools.
So I think that's an interesting idea, Caleb. I know that, at least in the group I was in last week, one of the big things that we had in our discussion was less is more, and I know that Allison has actually taken out a lot of the data, trying to really focus in on what do we really need to share with people. I wonder if we might be able to agree to leave this chart the way it is, maybe add a sentence at the top. I can update the statement that's in the worksheet to be more specific, to reference the data that's included in this graph. And we can see if people have comments and questions about it at our community forum, and if people really want to see more breakout of that data, then we can decide to add that data at that point, rather than trying to imagine now all the different things that we might include. So I wonder if that would be an acceptable path.
So moved.
Hearing, I don't need a motion unless you want one, but hearing no concerns, we're gonna move, we're gonna turn the page quick before anyone changes their mind. So the next table, I think we've looked at this one a few times. I'm very hopeful that this one is pretty straightforward. I think this information came from the central office. It talks about the different school buildings. and details about them, including their values. This is specifically required in the worksheet, some of this data. So this is really a summary of that, including the values and the debts.
And the year built, which is very interesting.
Okay, great. So hearing no comments or questions on the status of the facilities, debts, and reserve funds, we will turn the page. So the next page talks about current school-specific funds, trust, etc. This was also included in the last draft, and I don't believe that there would have been any changes to this. So this just talks about some of those special funds that are mentioned under Article 6. And I know we did also get some information just today from Howard about the funds we used to call sinking funds that are now called capital project funds. So that's basically if a specific school district has been putting money aside for like fixing their roof or for specific renovations in their building. And so I don't know if we'll need to include that list specifically in the report, but I did get information from, so we got the information from Howard of what those funds are and what their balances are, although it's not an audited end of year balance. Still, we have a sense of that, and we got the message from Steve that he feels comfortable that there won't be any issue with those funds being transferred to the new district. Steve?
So, of course I like these. I don't think that under the heading of less is more, I don't really care about what their current balances are. I.e., the last 3 lines or last 2 lines on each one of these. Like, just take Marshall Trust on what's my page 21. There's a balance on 12/31/2015 and on 3/1/2016. I don't know that that's really giving any information that's useful to people.
So you would prefer to see it just listed, like maybe even just the current, the balance as of 3/1/2016 and take out the rest of that?
It's all that, basically it's all that's being, they're just helping total up those 3 columns of figures. I don't need to see that. I don't think.
And what I did there was I took it from the annual school reports, the
Right,
way they
right.
have it listed, the way
Yeah.
central administration lists it. So that if somebody saw it, they would recognize it if they actually
So, I mean, I don't
do the 2.
care. I mean, if we want it like that, it's fine.
And I got 2 different balances, so that's why the 1231 is there and the 31.
Can I ask?
Yeah, hold on, Nancy and then Mike.
I have a question actually about page 20, so if you'd like me to wait on this, I'm happy to.
Okay, yeah, let's see, Mike, did you
Okay.
have a question on this?
I have a question for Steve. Are you saying that you would just list the funds and not put the numbers in there? Or is that too?
No. I'd list the funds and the numbers. I just wouldn't bother totaling them up.
Oh. Interesting.
Or just give the totals for whatever, March.
Sort
So
of
hold on.
related to this.
Okay, Nancy wants to ask
Did
a
I
question
read,
on
I
page
wasn't
20.
here last time, but did I see that the attorney was suggesting that something about dispensing with funds before 1819, or I thought I read something about that.
Wait, do you want to answer that? Yeah, go ahead.
I heard him say that some schools may decide to bring their balance down to 0 before the changeover, just to simplify things. You know, they can do that if they want.
Of like their capital projects.
But he wasn't advocating that they do that.
No, he just said they can do anything they want with them.
Okay.
Right, so if you
Well-
and Starksboro have been saving money for some sort of building repair, the Starksboro board could use that money for a building repair prior to the unification, or if not, then that fund would be transferred and would be, continue to be held for that purpose. So it would exist under the unified school district, but it would still be kind of
Earmarked.
reserved, it would be earmarked, thank you, for use in Starksboro for that repair.
So Jen?
Yes.
So Steve, would you like to see, say for Bristol Elementary School, Clinton A. Hanks Fund, the description of what it is, and then the balance 3/1/16?
That'd be awesome. Or
Okay,
or
I can do that.
12/31/15. Yeah.
I can take I can take out all of those extraneous lines, have the information and just the balance,
Yeah.
and that can help.
I don't know if the rest of the committee thinks that's reasonable or not.
Hearing no objections, that sounds like a great idea, so that will help just to shorten it up a little bit, so it doesn't feel quite so thick. Okay, great, so we will then move on to the page that is labeled page 20. It says financial information at the top.
Ooh, one quick one,
Oh.
Jen. On page 23, trust funds, Brennan, I think that there's an extra space in there. It's probably
Oh,
4,096.
yes, I see what you're saying. Yep, got it.
Trivial.
Okay, so on page 24, we have financial information, ANESU pre-K combined enrollment and total education spending from fiscal year 10-11 to fiscal year 16-17. We have looked at this chart a few times. I know we had a suggestion to make sure that the scale included kind of the full range so that didn't over exaggerate the increase in the education spending. So this, I think we have seen this in other communities' reports. It really just tries to compare your spending and your total enrollment.
And
Questions,
should say
comments?
so in the little header.
So we should add a description. Something like what I just said. You like what I said?
Yeah, absolutely.
Are you good? You want me to say it again?
Oh.
Do you have something already?
No, you can type it up and send it to me. Or you can say it again.
I was just speaking off the cuff. It's on the video. No, I said something along the lines of this chart shows the trend of, the increase in spending over time, and then the general trend of a decrease in enrollment over that same period of time. Ed?
This is as tiny and trivial a point where it says total budget in parentheses, dollars, millions. It's not. You're showing it actual numbers.
Right.
So the word million comes out.
Yep.
Oh, good point. Unless we want to add a lot more zeros. We're spending $26 billion in our school. That would be fun.
Billions, it would be quadrillions. That's 21 quadrillion dollars.
Nancy?
Am I correct? I may be totally incorrect, but it seems to me that, and I do still need to go back to page 20, but it seems to me on this one that the right-hand scale doesn't begin at 0, but is there maybe a reason for that that I'm not understanding on page 24?
That's true.
I think we want both scales to start at 0, right?
Yes. It's just when you do that, the blue line is all the way across the top and it's very almost flat and over the orange lines, and it's hard to tell what the correlation is. And the other reports that I've seen, they start at a number around 1,400 and 1,450 and go up to 1,800 to get an idea of what it looks like.
Mathematically, it's a no-no to do this, but you should at least put on the side broken bars and a 0 to show that it is a compressed scale.
And I can put that side at 0.
But it changes very dramatically how the lines and the trend lines look to not actually begin at 0.
Yep.
It's not,
Yeah, Wall Street Journal does this all the time.
it doesn't make it right. It's sort of like the Vermont AOE, I mean, just because it's done doesn't mean it's
misleading.
It is misleading, mathematically.
And if we want to make it look, if we're willing to do it, we want to, start at 1,550, make it look really big.
So I would suggest that there might be some level of balance between trying to make sure that we're having the right scale and also being able to actually
Again,
see a trend.
What are we trying to show?
Yeah.
Kayla?
I think the point is that you're not showing a real trend here. I mean, if you're trying to show a trend, this isn't showing a trend because of what Ed's saying. And it's not that it's bad, it's just that when you've got the two scale, other than the starting at 0, the two scale, it's true that the scale on the other side captures the entire range on the right side, right? It captures the entire range. You're like, great, you know, you got the whole range in there. But like Nancy's saying, you know, because you're viewing it next to kind of a more, I mean, if anything, you could kind of compress the left side and have the right side be more accurate, because the left side's not showing a trend so much as it's just showing totals. But the kind of line up and down, yeah, I agree that it's not, it kind of makes it look like you're showing something, but I don't think you're showing something that exists. Maybe I'm not putting it clearly. I just think it's sort of it's a message without, yeah, it doesn't seem, maybe we just see it it's hard to have a different scale on the left and the right. I mean, that's just a hard graph to get right anyway, so it's
So I'm not sure that it's going to be effective if we try to use one scale for those two data sets. I think that if the desire of the committee is to show the same scale, that they would need to be on separate charts. Because, I mean, I thought that the conversation was that on both the left and the right, that we needed the scale to start at 0.
Yes.
Not to put them all on the same scale, because
Right.
if you
No,
had
not on the
them
same
all just
scale.
on one
Right.
scale, then it would just be
That
a
was
flat
the
line at the bottom. right?
That was the conversation.
It is a conversation.
It is always difficult to overlay things that don't, I mean, they don't actually relate to each other than that they're happening at the same time. And so that is the challenge of those two-sided graphs. They are very difficult for people. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, they do have to be 0. Both charts really should be 0 based, both sides of that graph. I've come around to Mike's way of thinking on this. Taking me a little while, but.
Patrick?
I wonder if what we're trying to say in this graph that we're talking about now, and the graph on the next page that talks about spending per pupil, they're really the same thing. It's kind of what it seems like we're attempting to highlight here is that our costs are going up or leveling out, depending on what kind of trend you want to look at here, while the number of our students are going down, which I think could be captured through the spending per pupil. Does it in a different way.
Nancy?
I wonder, apart from the scale issue, if numbers are going down and spending is going up, there might be many possible reasons for that, and certainly interacting reasons. And it could be that student needs are increasing, and so it seems important to try to quantify that as well. There might be some different ways of doing that in terms of numbers of kids who qualify for special education, numbers of kids who are eligible for free and reduced lunch. But I think if we're trying to show a complete picture of what's happening with enrollment and spending, then showing that would be also important.
Caleb and then Patrick?
Another way to kind of present this same information would be to say, and you could do it year by year, but from FY10 to FY17, you see a budget increase of 8.5%, and you see a student enrollment decrease of 6.1%. I think that captures the point that we're trying to make, right? I mean, the lines on the page can be visually confusing, but those numbers, like if you go year by year and say, hey, this year to this year we have 1.2% increase in budget, but our student population went down by 4.3% or whatever it is. Those numbers as a side-by-side comparison, and then looking at the aggregate over time with a simple kind of spreadsheet chart, you can capture that same point, which is to say, hey, total numbers are going up in terms of what we're spending, general trend of student populations is going down. And I do think that's what this graph kind of, like to the eye, shows. It's just I think that the fact that it's not following some kind of conventions makes, weakens that point to some extent.
Patrick is reading.
To Nancy's point about trying to capture student needs somehow as we're looking at this, Equalized Pupils does that. The formula for calculating equalized pupils takes into account students on plans, students on free reduced lunch, secondary students versus elementary students. So again, coming back to that, the spending per equalized pupil captures that trend and captures all those different needs. In a way that's maybe harder to understand for folks, but.
I mean, I guess what I'm saying is, people who aren't close to the schools might look at the increase in spending and decrease in enrollment and say, what the heck is going on here? What are you people? You're crazy, people who are running schools. Because they don't see all other parts of the picture that people who are running schools see in terms of what student needs are and how they've changed over time, particularly since the recession. So I don't know that the equalized pupil to a person, I don't know if that quite does it, is what I'm saying.
Great, we had a number of hands up over here, and I think Mike, you were waiting also. Maybe not? No. Ed?
I would opt to take that graph out entirely and just go with equalized pupil spreadsheet and the one on the next page. One on the next page is the one we're really, I think we're really after. And it shows some good news that we're reversing the trend around cost per pupil.
That's essentially where I was going with.
Right, yeah.
Okay, so the proposal on the table is to take out the chart that has, that shows the line and the bars that we've been talking about. Kate?
I was just going to agree. I think we're opening up a can of worms. It does not explain at all why, and I just think it's like a shock.
Okay, so the proposal on the table is to take out this chart. Hearing no objections. Perfect. We're not doing an official motion unless someone wants to, I think, as long as we have a sense of an agreement on that. So then we will continue to maintain the table that's on the bottom of that page that shows the change in the equalized pupils that corresponds to, another piece of the picture that we see on the following page with the ed spending per equalized pupil trends in that graph, and then the data table at the bottom, which is the basic way that we calculate from our total budget to what our ed spending per equalized pupil is, and then that translates into a tax rate. Andy?
On 24, on the figure at the bottom, does the asterisk, is there something that goes with it?
No.
That was my question.
No, and it should be FY 13 through 17.
But maybe equalized pupil, it would be helpful to define that, to define pupil.
Yes, it's got the asterisk, but it doesn't say anything.
I wonder if someone has a concise definition of an equalized pupil. Sort of like a concise definition of how the CLA works.
I think we could get there. Equalized
there
pupil
are
is simply, it's a weighted formula to account for the cost difference for educating students. Not every student costs the same to educate, and the equalized pupil is a formula that accounts for that.
Did you get that, or do you want to say it again?
It begs the question then, what difference is it? Well,
Wait,
And
hold
we could
on,
go down
hold on,
that
hold on,
path,
time out, sorry.
how about grab that?
Allison.
Sorry, grab that.
Allison, did you get?
I got not every
Sure.
student costs the same to educate. Oh, and
It's a weighted formula, right? Was what I
is a weighted formula.
And we could give them by way of example without an exhaustive list. Or we could do
And
an
there are other
exhaustive
ways that other places have defined it, so.
Okay, great, thank you. Was there other discussion about any of these three, the table, the equalized pupil table, the ed spending per equalized pupil chart, or the budget, baseline budget data? Patrick?
Only reiterating the point I made earlier about wanting to articulate what the point of this is, if there's a point to it, in that more sort of narrative piece leading into it.
Allison, would you like the committee to take a stab at defining the point of those, or do you feel comfortable doing that?
We can define the point.
So you'd like the committee to do that?
I recognize there may be some of these that there isn't really a specific point, it's
Right.
just
I was
pieces of
just
information.
showing the percentage of change in the number of equalized pupils across 5 years.
And what's the meaning of baseline there, as you
Okay,
understand?
hold on. So you're on the, I
I'm
think,
on,
you're on the bottom of page 24.
yes.
So Allison, hearing no objections, I think what you just said is the description of that table sounds great. The percent change of equalized pupils over time, over the time period.
And percentage is misspelled on the figure.
With a definition of equalized pupils, yes?
Yes, okay. Okay, so, sorry, so Nancy was moving on to, oh, you were at the bottom of page 25,
Mhm.
baseline budget data. Isn't that what it's called in the annual report? Baseline, the baseline budget?
Yeah, it's all in the annual report.
I think Nancy's question was about the word baseline in
Oh.
the title. Is that what it's called in the annual report?
Probably not. I just borrowed what all of the other places have done, so I can take out baseline. It's the budgeted, well, essentially it is the baseline budget because we don't know what our expenditures are going to come out to be until FY17 is actually done. So it is the
Okay.
baseline.
It's the baseline in a project management standpoint
Okay.
of, it's what we have planned for
Yep.
the budget.
So
It's not
planned
the actual
budget data or
expense.
something.
What if we called it approved?
Current budget data.
Approved is sort of a.
Anticipated?
Well, it's the budget that was approved by the voters, right?
I think that's the conventional word.
Budget.
I'm not sure that's accurate either though, because this is speaking to ed spending specifically, which takes out some other factors that are included in the budget that's approved by the voters, so.
So how about if we just call it a baseline budget, if that's what everyone else calls it?
Fine. What are we
Well-
showing in this graph?
And we could put a little description below it, right? Just like we were trying to do with the other ones that says, something along the lines of, shows details based on the budget approved by the voters for fiscal 17 or something like that.
Comparison of town budgets for fiscal year 2017.
Can,
School,
Uh-oh.
hold on, just 1 second, I'll get there. Is that Nancy? Yeah?
I'm sure that there are other ways to, other connotations for this, but the connotation of baseline to me is these are the numbers from which we're going to start with in measuring progress or backward movement.
So
That-
for comparison of some sort.
Right. And I'm not sure that's the intention of of including these numbers.
Well, in project management, you set a baseline, you make a plan, like it would be like, we're gonna have our report done by this date. You have a plan, and then you measure against that, and you go, oh, we were 2 weeks past our baseline. So I think from that standpoint, the budget is our baseline, it's our plan of what we're gonna spend on what, on different areas, and then
But what's
at the end of
the,
the year, there's a comparison that says, because like in our financial reports, it shows, here's what you budgeted, here's what we've actually spent, and here's your difference. So that's how it's a baseline, it's the plan of what you were gonna spend. As
But
opposed to an
overspending doesn't
actual.
give you a new budget, right? You just blew your budget.
so the budget means that's the plan.
What about approved budget, right? The projected budget?
Or we can just say budgeted finance data. Take out baseline.
But what's the reason to include just 1 year? I mean, what was your thinking?
Well, it's like what Steve said. This showed comparison of town school budgets for FY17.
I see, to compare to each other.
Yep.
Okay.
The enrollment, pupils, spending.
Okay.
Tax rate,
Find this next
Yep.
actually interesting information.
one. Okay, we're gonna move on. we're on the page number 26 now that shows a chart. I think this is a new one. At least I don't remember it. Maybe
Yes, it is a new one.
A new one. Do you want to briefly introduce this one?
The education grand list by town, people had mentioned something about the way we're gonna accrue debt. I saw this somewhere else and I thought maybe it would be helpful, but it's by no means etched in stone that we have to keep it. But it just shows a percentage of each town's, to the district, each town's percentage of homestead value. And it actually, when you compare it to the census and the equalized pupils, and if you use the census new numbers, they kind of correlate together in a nice little way. It's interesting. And I only know that because I have the new chart. Chart.
Steve?
So, the figure at the bottom
Mhm.
with the percentage of total ANESU column is a cut and paste error.
Yes, it is, and I fixed
Yeah.
it.
No, that's fine.
Yep, it's been fixed.
Yeah, I may have an older version.
Well, I fixed it because I saw that
Yeah.
after I sent it out. I'm like, oh, those are the same.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. This is actually a pretty interesting graph. Pretty interesting stuff. Because for those of us who noodle with this stuff, knowing what the percentage total of homestead value to the whole district gives you a clue as to how much each one of those towns is going to cut in towards the education tax rate. Or
Baseline,
total.
it's a baseline,
Yeah.
baseline numbers.
Pretty interesting.
Okay, any other comments on this page?
Just so I'm clear, this is the old census data, and there's,
yes, you have the old census data,
Okay.
so we have new census data.
Right, the Bristol number went from 59 to like 39.
3894.
wow.
Yeah.
So it was apparently misreported somewhere, and Allison confirmed it with the town clerk that is the accurate and correct, is the 3894. We have it in writing, so
So
I'm
then-
not really sure how other places have it listed wrong, but anyhow.
So then our town total, or the district total, goes down to 10,649.
And you'll see that in the articles when we get there. So my only comment on this is I think, as we've done with the other ones, we need a little blurb to describe it. Like, I didn't understand that the percent of the total homestead dealt with the whole district, so I was trying to make those numbers add up. I was really confused about that column. So just, it seems like we could certainly put it in, but putting some sort of a description at the top would be helpful. Other comments? Okay, moving on to page number 27. You guys might recognize a version of the governance structure diagrams that we shared at our last community forum. And so I think we had some discussion at the last meeting about that might be helpful to have a visual about the different governance structures. So that's what's appearing at the top there. It is fairly small, but hopefully that's enough to be clear. I'm gonna say in my black and white printout, I don't know what those bottom boxes are. They really don't show up.
Well,
so
and actually I can split them up, put them both on the same page, just one on top of the other, and then move the estimated savings over to the next page. Because that can, that'll work.
We'll make it bigger.
Yeah, I'll make both of them bigger.
I have a question.
Chrissy,
I'm sorry,
go
back on 26, do we have the pie graph too, just for different learners? As opposed, this is just reflecting, the right side is reflecting the other side. Is that why we have them both, or is it necessary?
Oh, to have the table and the graph?
Yes. Sorry.
So on
just a
this
question.
page.
I'm
Right,
sorry,
so
I
the question
went
is
back.
just that the pie chart is just basically just a picture of the
Yes.
data.
Yep, it's a picture of the percentages.
Right.
Right,
Of
right,
each-
Do we
right.
need both, do you think? Or do
Um,
people think? I don't know. Good question.
By looking at the new data, it actually shows it's pretty consistent. The percentages of all of those things, those three different things are pretty consistent across.
So it's a better visual to have
Yes,
the
it
pie.
is definitely a better visual. And I made it all town specific colors.
Snack. Oh, thanks, sir.
So,
Mike? Mike,
So,
you're back on the next page, page
the
27.
charts of the decision-making. I noticed that in the confusing chart, the ANESU board and the executive committee are separated into two different entities, which makes me wonder whether there will be an executive, or one would envision there'll be an executive committee in the new structure, and should it be put in the picture?
So, Patrick,
So the executive committee is are the chairs from all of the boards. If there's one board, the executive committee would be a person. And I'm not sure, I suspect the supervisory district committee wouldn't want to delegate too much authority to that single person as a committee of their own with any real authority to work directly with the superintendent. And I would also argue it moves us closer, although one tiny little step closer, to the more confusing org chart, where there's less continuity and clarity around lines of
I
communication.
guess to be more clear in my question, I have made lots of charts to make them look as confusing as I could make them to prove a point. And I just don't know, and I saw this chart last time, and I just don't, it just comes across that way to me, and maybe I'm wrong.
Well, the confusing chart is what happens in our governance. And so the executive committee makes decisions separate from the board, the ANESU board. The ANESU board doesn't meet very often during the year. The executive committee meets generally twice a month. So it is a separate body. And it needs to be, because through the chairs being on that board, they then direct each of their individual boards, but they also direct the SU board. So it's not intentionally made to be confusing. That is an accurate depiction of what our governance does. And then there has, all along, the discussion has been there will be one board, and then there won't be an executive committee, because there won't be any need to have an executive committee because we have one board. We don't have 6 boards plus an ANESU board. And then we would just break up into, if need be, smaller committees as needs come up. But there hasn't been any discussion about creating an executive committee for the consolidated board.
Well, actually, the executive committee is, the SU board delegates to the executive committee powers to do things, so that the SU board doesn't have to meet as frequently, and it can more easily, the decisions can be more streamlined because a quorum can be reached more easily and so forth. So really, the executive committee, because the SU board defines its powers, it really answers to the SU board, and it doesn't, it's supposed to not do anything that hasn't been delegated to it. So it's not really it's not as lateral a relationship as this graphic portrays.
Hold on, sorry, Ed was waiting, are you still?
I'm just curious what the dotted lines represent.
Allison, do you want to comment on the line?
So originally, the dotted lines were red lines going from the Bristol, or the board, individual boards to the principals. Because at least with Bristol, our principal sits in on essentially all of our board meetings. And even though technically we're not supposed to direct the principal, we're supposed to direct the superintendent, who's then supposed to direct the principal's sitting in the meeting, and here's what we say, and then receives direction from that, whether it's intended or not. So that direct link from the board to the principal was taken out, but the dotted line goes from the board to the superintendent to the principal because of the way, at least with Bristol, and I would imagine it's the same with a majority of the other schools. And we may not do it intentionally, saying superintendent tell the principal to do such and such. I think in the process of the way we've done our governance, it kind of has become a very gray line, and it happens. Whereas with a new governance structure, it's very clear. You have your board, you have your superintendent, you have your principals. And there's no nebulous misunderstanding between all of them. And because that's how it works. And that's what this is a representation of how things are actually going right now. And in terms of the executive committee, I think possibly in the discussions that we're having in the boards, the SU board may have potentially given too many things of authority to the executive committee to do. So the SU board isn't doing what it should be doing because it's given almost all of its authority over to the executive committee.
That's your
So
opinion,
let's-
I understand that's your opinion.
So we need to focus, guys, on getting through
So-
this.
It's just trying to show the way we're currently working versus the way the unified structure is supposed to be used.
Thank you for clarifying that, Allison.
I just have a question, it's kind of related. Did we vote to change to a 15 director model? I saw the thing, I didn't see it in the minutes from the meeting I missed.
We
When was
did.
that? Because I thought I missed one meeting.
Last week.
No, it's 2 meetings ago.
So we got some feedback from AOE that our model that we were looking at with the town-based representatives being elected by the town and the at-large being.
No, I remember that.
And so the concern was raised that that wasn't proportional.
Yeah.
And then there was a discussion in that meeting where we did vote to go to a 15-member board that was all proportional, elected by the towns. It would have been, and I will defer to you guys, I think it was 2 meetings ago.
Okay, yeah, no, I was at that meeting, I thought we had gone to a 5-2-2-2-2 thing, and that's what we had gone to, all elected at
Well, it
large.
was 7-2-2-2 was how the math was working at that point. The
Okay.
reason it has changed is because the Bristol census numbers that we just got yesterday. So
Okay.
the 7 was based on thinking that Bristol had 46% of the population.
All right. So the reason that I'm seeing different numbers is because we changed proportionality, because we voted on proportionality, and then that changed.
Didn't
Right.
change
Okay.
proportionality. Just the proportionality remains, but the census data changed. So the number of people to get the appropriate proportions.
Yeah, the number of people per town changed.
Right.
Right, and that's because Bristol went from 47 to 36% or whatever.
Right. It's a drop of 2,000 people.
Okay, got it, thank you.
Made a big difference.
So
Yeah.
Shauna just showed me it is in the minutes from the 6/22 meeting.
Not the change of the numbers, but
Right,
of the
the-
proportionality in the 15-person board.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know that was definitely confusing.
Yeah, because I mean, I'm just seeing this, and it's a significantly different board composition than we were talking about. And, which is fine, you know, we did vote on proportionality, so that makes sense, thank you.
Okay, are we ready to move on? We've been looking at the current governance structure. We have the estimated cost savings based on actual fiscal year 16 expenditures. And I guess, Allison, I'm gonna have to ask you, this looks like a different number than the number that we saw before. Did these numbers change?
They did, because of comments or issues raised with the previous table being only the 4 things listed, I had already done a breakout, and so that was a consolidation of all of those things, but there were many questions. Well, does it include this? Does it include that? Does it include this? And it was, yes, it includes those things and maybe some no's. So then I went back to our budget reports that we've gotten from Howard, and since it's the end of the year, we're pretty close to knowing what we've spent. I took the actual expenses and the encumbrances for the boards themselves, and it's all broken out in the bigger table. And then I didn't have a hard copy of the executive committee SU budget, so I went back as far as I could find, or as soon as I could find. So I have to change these numbers, but what had been expensed so far for the SU board. So by doing that, taking the actual expenses versus on the bottom it says audit services, FY15 pre-audit actuals. It's not, it's FY16 actuals, and you can see where none of the boards have any audit services, only the SU board does. So what I did was I divided it by the 7 audits that we have to come up with one number for one budget. Because before I did have what each school had expensed for their audits, but it didn't make any sense to do that, so I just took the 16 amount, and that shifted things a little bit, as well as other expenses, actual expenses. And then I'll just go and get a final accounting, essentially, from Howard to make sure those numbers are accurate, because there are some encumbered numbers in here that may not have expensed out as much as were encumbered, or may actually expense out more than were encumbered. So it helps that we've hit the year end.
So can you explain the 2 columns on the right that are labeled 2316 EC agenda at the top?
Right, so
What are those?
those are the 2316 executive committee agenda applies to the SU board expenses in this SU budget.
Because that was the last SU.
That was the last one that I could find. So it could be higher, it could be lower. And then the green, or well, whatever color, the UUSDB, the 15 members, what I did was salaries, I did it based on a new board, the numbers of a new board. So, all right, so you've got 15 board members and 1 board. So there are, I don't know what salaries for professional staff would be, but salaries other support staff would be the minute taker, but I could be wrong. So it would go, essentially if you have 1 board and you have 1 minute taker coming to the board meetings, 1 minute taker to 1 set of board meetings. If you have 1 board meeting, I think I even did it 2 board meetings a month for 9 months, 10 months. So 20 board meetings times $20 an hour. And then I must have included something else in there. I might have had more meetings. Maybe it was 11 meetings a month times 2 times $20 an hour. So 1 minute taker was $720. Then the salaries professional stipend, that's for the board members. And you can see that all of the individual boards had, for FY16, $25,000 worth of stipends for approximately 34 people.
And did they all take them?
That's what it was expensed. So it may not necessarily be for 34 people, but that was what is expensed in the budget. So if you go to 15 board members, and I probably used a $1,500 stipend, that $22,500 was the number.
So Allison, can I ask you to just pause for a second?
Yep.
I just am curious if the committee wants to continue at this level
Sorry.
of detail, or if you'd like to.
Yep.
I was more asking, like, I didn't know what that column was for.
Okay.
But this is helpful because I don't know that we've gone through it. I'm kind of curious because we are,
Yep, no, that's fine,
25
sorry.
minutes over the time we allocated for this, and we do still have other topics to cover tonight before we close. So I just want to make sure we get the information we need, and that people don't hate me when we stay here late again. Nancy?
I just have a question about the audit numbers. If I'm reading this right, we're expecting audit services to go from 127,853. Am I reading that right?
No, that's the total. That's a total.
Oh, that's a total, okay.
Yep.
To go from
65,670.
65,670 is what it is now, yes?
Yes.
To 9,381. And is that, have we gotten an estimate from the auditor about what the audit would cost? And that's the estimate?
No,
So,
That's just a divide by
it's a
7.
divide by 7.
so wouldn't it, I mean, if I were the auditor, I'd charge more than that.
Yeah.
So, which may be why I'm not an auditor, but I wonder if it's possible to get an actual estimate.
Katrina?
Howard did offer a note about that, saying that he likely would not use the divide by 7. He would feel it would be more accurate to reduce by 40%
Okay.
from the original amount. Thanks for the reminder.
Awesome.
So that's like 40,000, 39,000.
Okay. Other questions about the cost savings data? Or feel free to, if you guys want to keep going through it in that level, in the detail, we certainly can do that.
About
Yeah, 39,000.
Okay, great. So hearing no more questions on that, then thank you, Allison, for putting all that together. You've done a lot of work on these numbers and this analysis and the research to get the numbers, so we're very fortunate to have you taking the time to do that.
Nice, nice work.
Maybe you should be an auditor or an accountant or something. If we keep moving on, the next page has a heading for the homestead tax rate comparisons. I know that there was a lot of discussion and questions about the information that was provided in the last draft. I know we are trying to work with Howard to get some better data about what those tax rate projections and tax rate savings might be. I don't know, Patrick, if you have anything else you want to say about that? Or?
Sure. So we reached out to a couple of different folks. I reached out to the Vermont Superintendents Association, and somebody else reached out elsewhere. Both folks pointed us to this person in Franklin Northeast, I can't remember which, who has done some really good work on this, and we have reached out to that person, and they're not in until Monday. So I think in the meantime, Howard's doing some work on this, but he'll be connecting with this other person who's another business manager to get some ideas about how can we make this really clear to the taxpayers. So that work is sort of waiting that connection.
Great, that's really helpful, thank you. I'm glad that you guys are able to reach out and look at different reports. It seems like there's a wide variation in what they're able to provide. So for the draft that we're gonna send out on Monday, I assume, should we plan on having this page be blank, or is there something that Howard would provide? I mean, maybe instead of being blank, it might say data, I mean, we could put some sort of a watermark on it or something, but effectively, are we saying we're gonna send the report draft out without any sort of tax rate calculations in the draft?
I'm not certain of what Howard's intentions are for Monday, and some of it depends on can he get in touch with this guy Monday morning or at any point on Monday. I know Howard knows the importance and that this is time sensitive. I think he's going to be pushing on that. I just don't know where he'll get because it's only partially within his control.
Right. So then we should probably plan on kind of getting an update during the day on Monday, and then the report goes out at whatever time, at 5, depending, no matter what, or something like that.
Yeah.
I guess it wouldn't be 5, because we'll need Karen to post it, so it would have to be like 3. So it'd have to be, it feels unlikely to me,
Could it be
because it would need to get to,
To me, and then I have to
and
put
it would
it
have to
in.
get in, and then
Could
it
take a
has to
while,
all get
yeah.
published together and get posted.
Perhaps the stars will be aligned, but we probably shouldn't bank on it.
So can you plan to add some sort of a note that says that calculations are still underway and will be added in future drafts or something like that? Cool. Was there a hand over here? Go ahead.
It'd be the handout of the form itself, you promised that.
So Ed suggested perhaps it could be a handout of the forum itself, if we had it by then, so that's a great idea. Thanks. Steve, did you have another comment? That was it? Okay. Moving on. So Allison has put some other appendices in here. As she mentioned before, there's the ends policy, the 5-town promise, and something about Act 77, and I'm not sure if you've added any others.
No, just those 3 so far.
Yeah, and so I don't know if anyone has any thoughts. I mean, obviously those aren't anything that we would edit. It seems to me, since they're fairly short, it's not, we wouldn't want to put a lengthy document in, but something short probably could be helpful to people to reference. Nancy has her hand up.
I just, on page 30, I just wonder, I'm curious about the 5-town promise. I'm curious about, is this what it is, or is there more of it?
Katrina, do you want to answer that?
That's what it is.
So the promise, if when we're,
It's Mount Abe's most recent iteration of identifying their vision for proficiency-based learning. It's been presented to the board, it's been presented at a community engagement, and there's a community-involved advisory council. It will have more legs moving into this year.
but it refers to a
But it's
living
been-
document.
It's been referenced and on the first page, that's why we're providing it.
Right, but it refers to a living document, and I'm just curious about where the living document lives.
The link is up.
This is a living document.
Yeah, this is the living document.
Okay.
And
got
the
it.
link is up at the top.
I'm sorry?
The link is printed at the top.
The
Oh,
link,
wait, sorry, no, yeah, it is.
If you go online.
At the very top of the
At
page.
the very top of the page itself, the link itself to that document is
Yes.
there.
to this document that we're looking
Yeah.
at?
Yeah.
We'll make a friendly link.
You're gonna make this a bit.ly or something?
It's-
Okay. So that completes our review of the report. Woo!
On to the next.
Can we do a dance? In all seriousness, thank you guys so much for the work on this. It's been a great collaboration. It's so exciting to see it coming together. Great discussions tonight. I feel good that we have some clear direction. Hopefully Allison agrees that we have some clear direction. But that I feel really confident that we'll be able to have a good draft to share with the community for our community discussion. Hopefully you guys agree. Christy.
I just had a question about, I think, in this new piece that we got from Steve Stitzel.
Yes, we're gonna do that next.
Oh, okay. I thought you were wrapping it up. I thought we were gonna do this, but then it sounded like a wrap.
No, that's just agenda item number 4.
Ah, okay. Thank you.
I know, I get excited when we finish the big one though, so. So we are going to move on to the discussion of the articles. So what we have on the agenda is to talk about the temporary name for the use in the report. So I would like to talk about that. I also would like to just talk briefly about the 2 things that I handed out. Let me do that first. So the 2 handouts today, there was the most recent copy of the Articles of Agreement from Steve Stitzel. You'll notice that it has effectively red lines. They're not red, but it has the markups that he's been making. I believe that those tracked changes include both the changes since our discussion with him last week, where we raised lots of questions and there were some ideas that came up, as well as some wording stuff that he's been going back and forth. There have been a lot of emails between Steve and Donna Russo-Savage at the AOE. So like Article 1, for example, they've been back and forth about how they want the wording around the supervisory district approval, stuff that really most of us probably are perfectly happy to let those lawyers figure out and tell us what it needs to say. I don't believe they've made any substantive changes beyond what we talked about last week. The most important change is just as we've already discussed that because the census for Bristol changed, if you look on page 5, you can see this is updated, this is in the article packet. The Bristol town population went from being roughly 5,900 to being 3,894. Not the population itself changed, but the number that we have for the town population changed. So that did change the number of board members from each town, and so that is reflected in this. It is also reflected in Article 9, where it talks about how the terms will be distributed. So Steve updated that so that there would be the right number of terms for each town. So really, other than that, there's really not any significant changes here from what we looked at last time. So the other item from Steve, I think you guys, I think we've discussed as a committee that something that our lawyer would do would be to write an official legal opinion about the constitutionality of our proportional representation. So this is the draft that he has sent over to Donna at the AOE to look at that. Once again, it cites lots of lawyery stuff with court cases and such about the legal grounds for how, how close to exactly accurate our representation is. I think the good news is that he feels that our representation is constitutionally acceptable. So they're just sort of working out, I think, the wording that letter, what needs to be referenced in the letter. Okay, so. So now, we are gonna tackle the next one fast. I know we can do it. We wanted to come up with a temporary name that we could use in referencing our new district, even though we can continue to understand that the new board can do community engagement and to come up with a real name. We just should call it something other than the new district. Steve has encouraged us to do that. It would be nice. It would give us something to call it in the meantime. Last week I challenged everybody to think about it and to come with, ready to make a decision about it. Sarah, you have your hand up.
Yes, I think it should be Addison Northeast. That's my motion.
So, are you phrasing that as a motion? I move
that we call this, for this document purpose, Addison Northeast. Supervisory District, ANESD.
Is there a second?
I second.
Seconded by Michaela. Okay, is there any discussion? Oh my gosh, okay, there's no discussion. All those in favor of temporarily calling our new supervisory district the Addison Northeast Supervisory District, please raise your hands. Oh my gosh. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All those opposed? Abstentions? So that would be 8 to 0 to 2. So that motion passes.
Wow.
Holy moly, you guys, I know I said we were gonna do it quick, but like, sorry, set a new record. We've never done anything that fast.
Moving.
And Michaela,
Can you make a motion right now to let the community forum discussion?
all right. Okay, we are moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is the community forum discussion. Nancy?
I'm sorry to go back to the appendices, but I did click the link at the top of the Five Town Promise page. It is a link to about a longer document that has a lot of detail in it, but it also has some pictures and stuff. And so I wonder if there's, and it's important stuff, and I wonder if there's, we should consider putting more of the meat of that. If we're going to reference it at all, put more of the meat of it into this document or don't reference it at all. Because just referencing what's here doesn't really explain the half of what it is.
My opinion is that it was only included in the executive summary as a way to offer a way in which our middle high school already merges our 5 towns together. I would hesitate to go much deeper in this document about that because it hasn't even been adopted by the Mountie Board yet. It's not something that's being highly used by the entire 7-12 population at this time, only piloted in 9th grade. So and with a new principal on board, I would be hesitant to be the one to talk more about it while we're in transition.
That makes sense, but then it just does, because just including this doesn't make sense unless the link, at least the link is more obviously referenced as to see more, like to say, to see more about the 5-town promise, you can click on this link, and so could more easily know that there's more there, and that they could go to it.
Yeah, so I agree. Put it down, yeah, we'll make that link more friendly and put it down at the bottom, perhaps, of this page. Would that be what you're looking for,
Well, but I
Nancy?
mean, I think
And
Katrina's
some sense.
expressing a hesitation about calling people's attention to it more. And in that case, perhaps we shouldn't
Strike it.
mention it at all in the executive summary, because if we can't explain it, it makes no sense.
So I guess I need to play around with what
Okay.
I actually linked to the
Okay.
document, because I thought the link I provided is what's already on the Mountie website, which is just the 6-page document.
Right. Oh, no, that's.
But you're saying that the
I'm
link is
saying
going
that
somewhere
what's in
else?
the
The
appendix
link is an
here,
8-page document.
8-page document.
it's
Yeah,
not, it's not clear on this page. It's not clear enough that if I wanted to know more, that's where I would go.
Right.
Okay.
Nancy's saying either include all 8 pages or make the link.
Or make the link a more prominent way to get.
Okay.
Yeah,
More
just title the
information.
link as link to a document.
So guys, I'm really sorry, but we've already closed that item on the agenda, so I think we've heard the concern, and I look forward to hearing how we can try to address that concern.
Great.
In the future, so thank you. We're gonna move on to item number 6, the community forum discussion. So we did, the communications working group has met twice since our last meeting. We've been busy. We met on Friday and we met just before this meeting. We did have a really great conversation with Nancy Unette, who is the facilitator that this group had previously agreed to retain for our last community engagement. So we were getting some advice from her. We spent quite a while, actually, who am I talking? Who else? Someone else who was at the meeting. Did anyone else want to talk about what we talked about with her and what's going on with the community forum? Steve, you want to do it?
No, not me.
Okay.
Yeah,
So she really pushed us on what are we trying to get out of this community forum. So, you know, I think that we were struggling a bit with some different goals of how much are we trying to inform people about, you know, the work that the committee's done and the recommendation we're making, and what information are we trying to get from our participants. So where we settled on, I think, I have a few different notes about it, but we are basically trying to get some feedback on the report, whether the report is clear, whether it's complete, what questions people still have for us. We talked about, although I'm not sure, there's going to be some additional work to really figure out what the outline of the event looks like. There was some talk about possibly having people do kind of working groups around the articles specifically, and specifically the articles where we still have some, where we had some flexibility, right? Like the ones that we really talked about. So there's no sense in talking about what grades we're gonna operate, because that's not gonna change, you know? But so that there could maybe be some discussion on some of the articles where we've had a lot of discussion, as well as having some discussion around the report, you know, those kind of questions that I mentioned before. Is it clear? Does it make sense? I think what Nancy was really trying to encourage us was to think about structuring the event in such a way that people could understand what their role in the process was, and that they could provide input that we would be able to make use of, right? So that we don't give people an opportunity, not that we don't, but that we don't encourage people to provide the kinds of feedback that we aren't going to take any action on. then, because that's just frustrating for everyone. So to try to structure it in such a way that just the questions that are presented lead to discussions that hopefully are in areas that we are looking for input. So hopefully that makes sense. We are talking about having some sort of a short presentation at the beginning. Again, the structure, this is all still getting worked out. As well as having a handout that's some kind of a one-page-ish FAQ type document. It would probably be fairly generic. There's a lot of examples out there, so it would be broad Act 46 type questions. What does unification mean for our district? That kind of a thing. We have actually some examples if anyone wants to see them, but so we're going to be working on that as well. And we did also talk about having some sort of a written feedback sheet so that people either at some point in the process or as they're leaving could hand in some written kind of reactions, so that if people, to collect kind of different kinds of input than you might get in the kind of group discussion, and from people who might not be interested in speaking up during the group discussion. Sorry, I think that's my thing. Questions, comments, concerns? Oh, there's one other really important update that I didn't give yet, which is that we are still working on a location. We have not been able to reserve Holly Hall for the date of the 18th. It's actually booked that whole week. We are aware we can't use Mount Abe due to the construction that's going on there. We're currently thinking of holding it in Lincoln. I think that we have an inquiry out to do that, just in the effort to kind of continue rotating and visiting different towns. We are very hopeful that that will be ironed out tomorrow, so that we can make an announcement. We had hoped to have the announcement done sooner, so obviously we can't announce it if we don't know where it's happening. So hopefully you'll have that on your calendars. Monday the 18th at 6 to 8 p.m. somewhere in our 5-town district. You told me you wouldn't be there. I think that's warranted. You get to see your husband on your anniversary. Okay, Sarah, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just was looking at your, not yours, our list of committee work plan. Do we have 2 meetings next week and 2 meetings the following week? Just out of
I think
curiosity.
that's next on our agenda, but no,
Okay.
I don't think that's right, so maybe I'll miss something else. Okay, Nancy?
Is there also an all boards meeting that night?
That is the intention, and so we had put it out to the boards to see if they would be able to attend. So the idea for that is that the board members would participate. Let me start over. It would be warned as an Act 46 committee meeting from 6 to 8. That would be the community forum. Board members that we can hopefully twist their arms and get to attend would come and be part of that community forum, so that they would be able to ask questions or participate in any discussions, as well as hearing the community discussion that goes on. And that there would be individual board meetings warned for each local board that would start at the end of the community forum, so that boards who do have a quorum at that event would be able to have a discussion and provide, I hate to call it official, but kind of officially as a board, provide comments on the report. For any boards that are not able to make a quorum that night, and it's, that is definitely a possibility for some of the boards, there is the all boards meeting retreat in August, so that would still allow boards that opportunity to officially provide feedback before we finalize the report and submit it to the Board of Education. It would be desirable to have that input sooner, but recognizing that boards typically don't meet in July, we are asking for kind of a big thing for them to come. And who has another hand? Steve?
I'm also reminded that we had a request from the Addy Indy.
Yes.
And we didn't get a chance to discuss that in our communications meeting. So.
Yeah, I had made an initial contact to Gayan. It came back, she's on leave of absence. But John Flowers responded, so he's waiting for our story so we can publish it.
Great, thank you for raising that. So we do have a request basically, so we had kind of approached the Addison Independent about doing an article kind of ahead of the community forum as another way to publicize that event, and I think that John is interested in speaking with, I believe, myself and with Patrick tomorrow or imminently to talk about the upcoming forum. So we should probably touch base about that. Just another way to get the word out. Hopefully it will be, it would be covered in a different part of the newspaper than, say, a press release or a calendar event. So it's hopefully a good way to drum up some interest. I think that another thing that's really important that we've been talking about a bit within the communications working group is that as we now really are at a place of having a pretty strong recommendation as a committee, understanding that there hasn't always been consensus and that we have had differing opinions within the committee, we are reaching a point now where this committee has made a lot of decisions and we do have a position as a committee of what we are recommending, and it's going to become very important for us to start thinking about kind of the consistent message that we as a committee want to be sharing. And I know Steve shared a really great example, Tim, thinking of his role in the select board, that, you know, that he often gets to talk about, and I hope you don't mind me sharing it here, but he often gets to talk about, well, the select board has decided blah, 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 right? So this committee has now decided a lot of things. And so the message that we're sharing as a committee needs to reflect the things that this committee has decided, even in places where people might have individual differences in what their personal opinion is on specific points. So as we go forward, that's going to become more and more important for this committee to be able to have a similar message about what this committee is recommending. So I just encourage you guys to start thinking about that. As I'm sure we'll be talking more about our message as we go forward. And that'll be some work as well that we'll be hopefully starting within the communications working group. Great, so I'm going to move on to agenda item number 7, which is other business. No, I didn't put the work plan on the calendar. So I guess under other business, Sarah had a question about the work plan. So, oh, thank you, Sarah. So I've been struggling a little bit in the community work plan to show milestones and to show meetings. So the date of 7/11 is not a meeting, that's just a milestone, meaning that that's the date that we're targeting to have our complete report draft available.
Okay, good.
So I've been trying to write the word meeting next to any date where I'm implying that we would have a meeting. But no, I wasn't trying to ask you to be here twice next week. We really are targeting to get together twice the following week, just because you guys don't get to see enough of me, as it is. But the idea is that we will have the community forum and then that we would have a meeting to discuss, you know, and to act on what happened at that forum. I realize that having it in the same week might be challenging. However, from our doodle poll, we did look at a bunch of dates in that time frame. And the 20th, it was like, I've never seen this. Everybody was green on the 20th. And if we waited till the following week, we really were probably not going to get a quorum any of the days of the following week. So I'm going to ask you to consider it to be a sacrifice in the goals of not having to see each other for quite a few weeks after that, hopefully. If that's an issue for anyone, let me know. But we will definitely need to get together as a group following that community forum to act on what we hear from that forum. So that's what we're currently have planned is, so we have upcoming a meeting next Wednesday, which would be around preparing for the community forum, the 18th, which is the community forum and all boards meeting, and the 20th, which is to review and finalize our report based on that, the forum. I think we actually probably could discuss whether we all want to meet as a committee next week, or whether the committee is happy to have the communications working group do the preparation for the community forum. I don't know if you guys feel like you want to, at this point the plan is not very firm. We need to do some work with the facilitator. So I'm not sure if people feel comfortable walking into the community forum, without more information about what that's going to look like. I do recognize we have all been spending a lot of time together, so. So I would welcome any comments about that, whether we would like to meet next week to talk as a big committee about the community forum, or whether you're happy to have the communications working group put that together. There will obviously be an agenda. There will probably be some materials from the facilitator that could be shared. We could not have any discussion by email, if we choose not to have a meeting, but you could send questions to me and I can respond to questions. As long as we don't do any reply alls to the committee. Sarah?
So if there's a meeting next week and it's primarily the communications group, but anybody can come, do you have to have a quorum? I'm just looking at the protocol and this, like, do you have to have a certain number? Like, do you have to have less than a certain number or more than a certain number to have a meeting?
Well, so technically, I think, so there are rules about that, right? So that if we thought that we might have a quorum of this committee, that we should warn it as a meeting.
Okay.
Because if it would be we can't have an informal meeting that includes a quorum of this committee.
Gotcha.
We can warn a meeting and then not have a quorum and then just have a discussion where we don't make any official motions. Other than approving the minutes, like, I'm not really certain that we're gonna have any motions that we need to do next week anyhow. So I can do that, I can go ahead and warn the meeting, and if you're interested in being part of the conversation, great, does that make sense?
And this is on Wednesday?
It's next
Wednesday the
Wednesday is what we
13th.
had, yeah.
Yeah.
I
6:30.
didn't have it at 5:30, but it's
You have it at 5:30? No, it would be, I mean, we haven't picked any time other than its normal time.
okay.
Okay. So, that's good.
If it's, I am out of here, if it's just the communications working group, or if I have a conflict starting at 7 on that night. So a little earlier would be better for me.
So it is just the communications group?
Well,
If, whatever, you know.
we can start the meeting at 5:30, if that,
Six.
you're gone anyway, right?
I'm coming.
You're coming?
And I can go as early as you like.
Steve, 6:30?
5:30 would work.
5:30. Is 5:30 hard for you?
No.
Okay.
Should be fine.
Karen loves it when we change our meeting times and locations all at once. All right, 5:30 start on 7:13. Great. And Mike, if you leave, are we gonna lose our quorum? Let me just- No, okay, we're
I was
good.
gonna say, I
Thank
move
you.
that we adjourn.
Well, I was like, well, if we're gonna lose the quorum, we should adjourn, so. So I had actually put an item on the agenda to review the action items and owners. I meant to ask for someone to keep track of the action items. This was one of Patrick's suggestions to me, because what happens at the end of the meeting is then I just have a lot of the action items. I think we actually did a good job today, allocating out the things that we had. Most of the follow-up items are related to the report. So we can table that item, and we can move, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay, Steve,
about the
second,
restaurant.
seconded by Michaela.
I still had a question.
Oh, you still had a question? Okay,
I thought you were gonna get back to other because I didn't,
I'm sorry.
because I had a question
Oh,
about
you had a
the
question.
thing from Steve's.
I'm sorry.
Is it too
Can
late?
you withdraw your?
I do.
Okay.
Thank
So
you.
we withdraw the motion to adjourn.
I just-
False alarm, nobody leave. No.
I'm sorry.
No,
I'll try to
no,
be quick.
It's my bad. because I
Just
told
coming
you.
from Ari was, he said Steve was gonna write something up in his new articles covering the preserving independent fundraising by nonprofits. And I'm not sure, is that covered under specified funds? It doesn't seem like that.
So actually, he did specifically add that, it's in Article 7, subparagraph D. And you'll notice, and that's on page 4, and there's a bunch of underlined text. I'll slow down, so on page 4.
No, as long as it's there, I just want to make sure.
Article what? I'm sorry.
So it's in
7D.
Article 7, subparagraph D, it's the end of that paragraph. The words that he added were, additionally, the existing elementary schools and high schools have been supported by their respective communities by non-property tax fundraising activities. The new SD board will develop policies that will allow the continuation of school-based fundraising activities. Meaning fundraising for a particular school rather than for the whole district.
And that's what our request was, so thank you very much for
Are
pointing
you,
that out.
are you in contract with, I think his name is Andrew, from the Friends of the Lincoln?
Yes.
because he came and spoke to our committee, and I don't personally have his contact information. Would you be willing to follow up with him and let him know that we've
Okay.
specifically added that in there?
Yep.
Because that, he had some concerns about that.
Right, I just was following that up with that question, so thank you for
Perfect. Well,
letting me
would be
throw
great,
it in
and
there.
I feel good that we could get back to him on that. I mean, we had previously been advised that it really wasn't necessary, that nothing that we were doing would change that, but because there was, it seemed to keep coming up as a question, we
Okay.
did specifically add that in.
Okay, thanks very much, everyone.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. Look, we crossed 2 things off the list. Do you have any other questions? Okay, Steve?
I move for adjournment.
Second by Michaela. All those in favor?
All right.
Aye.
Any opposed?